All right. A very good afternoon to you, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this, what can we say, evening or afternoon session. Let's say afternoon session today, when we get to have another candid discussion and conversation around vaccine manufacturing in Africa. We'll be walking the journey through literature and through research that the team at Afya na Haki under the AMA program has been working on for the last 1 year. Today we will hear from different researchers, and I've had the privilege of participating actively on this program. My name is Solomon Serwanja, and I am the Executive Director at the African Institute for Investigative Journalism. I'm sure we are about 10 minutes behind schedule, so you'll allow me to officially start by asking you to please say hello to your neighbor, find out their names, where they work, exchange a card, and life is I don't know, it's difficult sometimes. All of us come to these spaces and want to keep it professional, but it would be great to share a smile with a neighbor or two. I'm sure we all have our program today, and like well put on the program, I'll ensure that we are done at least by 5:30, so that we are in time to pick up the children and also go back home. All right. Usually we start such sessions with a prayer, so I will do it the way Dr. Mulumba does it. He always says that we all have different ways we pray, so we just give ourselves at least 2 minutes in our different spaces to reflect, and at the end of the day we say amen. But for now, allow me lead you in that process. Let's humble ourselves and pray. Dear Lord, we are grateful for life. Thank you for bringing us here. We pray that you will guide us through, give us wisdom, knowledge, and understanding as we deliberate on a journey that as Africa we have to make to be able to manufacture our vaccines on the continent so that we can save our own people. We pray for all those that are going to be presenting today, that they will make it simple and easy for us to understand, and we also make a contribution to this discussion. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Without any further ado, I want to welcome all of you in your different dignitaries, in your different capacities. Thank you so much for coming. I've been informed we will be following protocol that will be established later on, but I want to officially invite you to this conversation and ask for your attention. Because we're running out of time, I'm going to be asking Dr. Moses Mulumba, who is the Director General at Afya na Haki, to come and officially welcome us with his opening remarks. Dr. Mulumba, you're very welcome. Can we love on him as he comes? Dr. Mulumba is a celebrated researcher and lawyer, and he has also been leading a team at AHAKI and other civil society organizations under this program, starting conversations on vaccine manufacturing in Africa. Dr. Mulumba, you're very welcome.
Solomon, thank you very much. You like celebrity things. I don't know what being celebrated looks like. How was I not clear enough? Okay. Access to medicines and how we are faring as a continent on the issue of sustaining access to medicines. Medicines, diagnostics, and other technologies are continuously evolving and playing a central role in our health systems. And yet, in the country where we are, and the continent where we are today, we continue to have more aspirations than the realization of the dream of being able to sustainably manufacture and have control of medicines and other innovations that are critical for our health systems. As a continent, we continue to consume almost a quarter the vaccines, for instance, that are produced globally. And yet, we can barely produce 1% of the same. For a long time, we've talked about supply chains, and the discussion seemed to be getting into the comfortable place of importation of medicines and supplying them and making them reach where we want them to be, but through the easiest way of importing. I always think about the Almata Declaration, and I remind people that in the Almata Declaration, old as it was, it had a very interesting statement that the manufacturing of medicines may seem expensive today and importation much cheaper, but in the long run, if you invested in the manufacturing of medicines and other health commodities, it would make the health systems much more sustainable. I think that the global, national, and regional conversations on manufacturing are taking center stage again. And I was lucky to be at the last global local manufacturing event that was concluded. And it was interesting that every time they talked about local and regional manufacturing, 90% of the presenters were presenting about Africa. It looks like even when we talk about regional, it's not a very big issue elsewhere in the regions as it is on the continent where we are. We can't stop talking about COVID-19, and in the area of access to medicines, I think COVID-19 was the second major wake-up call for the continent after HIV/AIDS medications. We had a lot of talk on HIV/AIDS and access to medicines for many years. And for me as a lawyer, I think I spent about 15 years working with colleagues on legal and policy issues that were impacting on access to HIV/AIDS medications, especially intellectual property as a big issue. And we kept accusing intellectual property legal regimes as our major encumbrances for access to medicines. I reached a certain moment and it was not making sense anymore to even talk about intellectual property and access to medicines for HIV/AIDS. Because eventually, where we never had the TRIPS flexibilities that they were talking about, we fought so hard, including in countries like Uganda, and we adopted the policy space, which we thought was very difficult to achieve. Our parliament passed the patent industrial properties legislation and included almost 75% the intellectual property legal regimes we were talking about. Even when eventually the world introduced there was a legislation on anti-counterfeits. And everyone thought anti-counterfeit legislation is taking away the policy space. We fought. And I remember the president, people explaining to the president what a counterfeit would mean in terms of animals. And he was finding it so difficult to understand it in the medicines. But when the team went and described what this would mean in animals and why it was dangerous sometimes to have a blanket way of approaching things, we pushed back on the anti-counterfeit legislation. And, HIV/AIDS medications, generics, were never classified as counterfeits as it was. In COVID-19, once again, the world closed the doors and it became a more nationalistic issue. Even India and Brazil, where we were getting medications, I think we saw statements where India said, no, we are first satisfying our own country needs. Indeed, even when they had contracts elsewhere, Africa was the last to be thought about. I remember the PS, the Minister of Health in this country, going on the television and saying, we've been able to secure the money, but we can't find vaccines on the market because brokers have taken the vaccines. I also remember countries like China coming here to negotiate deals, and medicines became the diplomacy tool. Vaccines were the diplomacy tool that was being used. I also can't forget a situation where South Africa was actually used to manufacture vaccines, but not for South Africans or Africans. All the manufacturing was happening and everything was packed and taken out of the continent. I think these events awakened the conversations on manufacturing medicines for sustainable health systems in African countries. In the African Union, I know we've interacted with work on the African Union model law, and now the commitments that they have made in PAVAM on manufacturing of medicines. We've not been short of commitments as a continent. We've not been short of aspirations to actually achieve the dream. I think our aspirations are there. And if political commitment was to be measured through policies and legal frameworks, I think Africa would be doing so well. The problem is translating these aspirations into realizable things. If we still struggle to sustain the pharmaceutical industry, I think we have real issues to deal with. I always share an example of a study we did long ago, coming to 7-8 years, and we found out that one of the pharmaceutical industries in this country had closed. And when we interviewed the former owners of the industry, they said it was more profitable to manufacture quencher and biscuits than medicines. So that's where we are on access to medicines. I think we have seen a wake-up call in countries like Rwanda. There is big investments happening on sites that are now being looked at as model sites. The question is whether we will sustain and whether we are attracting the technological advancements that we need to see as a continent to achieve that dream. As Afya na Haki, together with partners, over the last 1.5 years, coming to 2 years, we interested ourselves. We are supported by one of the partners we've been working with, the Open Society Initiative, to think about evidence generation and policy influence to see what contributions these could actually do, including some campaigns and raising awareness on regional pharmaceutical manufacturing. We've been implementing a program that we codenamed Advancing Regional Vaccine Manufacturing and Access in Africa. Today we have a number of researches that have happened, and we have navigated the terrain through partnerships and expertise of people both at the country level and at the regional level to find out.
I had an opportunity of interviewing Professor Pontiano Kalebu, who, by the way, we are privileged to be having such a humble giant, and a humble giant who opened up the doors of the Uganda Virus Research Institute wide for me to get in there and understand the whole science of vaccine manufacturing. And this is what he said. He said, look, this is not the first time we've been speaking about vaccine manufacturing, but there's been little attention or will to be able to fund research and development, to fund the science, medicines at the Ministry of Health to come and represent the Ministry of Health. Later on, we'll be hearing from Dr. Chabainze, who will be coming in later. Dr. Moiseru, you're very welcome to come and give us your opening remarks. After that, we can then get into the next agenda. Mr. Seru, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Solomon. Good afternoon. Our keynote speaker, ladies and gentlemen, in your distinguished capacities. I'm not the director. The director will come and give his remarks. And he didn't give them to read them. But since I've been asked to say something, I think let me grab this opportunity. First of all, I want to inform Mulumba that there is political will. The only problem could be galvanizing it into action. And we hope with all this pressure and all this research you're going to disseminate today, and those you have disseminated and those you will disseminate in the future, could will help us to put that political will and shape our policy so that at least we will shape our policies as far as domestic production of medicine and related health supplies are concerned. Having said that, as a government, we appreciate all this because we know as a government of Ministry of Health, we don't have the capacity to do all these researches. But when we hear someone has done research, we welcome. Unfortunately, many of the researches that are done gather shelves in the in the libraries of universities. But I'm happy that when you do something like this, at least you let us know, and we'll go to your publication. And I can assure you they will not go to waste. At one point or another, you'll see the fruits. Having said that, still as a government, there are things we are doing that really to create a suitable environment for people who want to invest in production of pharmaceuticals, both domestically and regionally. You know very well, we do give uptake agreements for those who are interested in investing in medicine and health supplies of public health importance. For instance, if it was not for off-take agreement we gave to Quality Chemicals would not be here. We didn't stop. We don't only stop at giving off-take agreement, but we also give other incentives. For instance, when we have public procurement, we give local manufacturers preference. Another thing we've done, once we realize that the local production of a certain commodity has reached a threshold that can satisfy the country, we increase the verification fees. Verification fees is what importers pay when they are bringing medicine in this country. We increased 15%. Recently, this where we have increased 20%. All this we do it because we want to protect our local industry. And of late, I think we've secured land where we'll have a pharmaceutical industry, how they call it, was park. It's called park, I think, industry park. All this, so that, what does that mean? That means the park will have all the utilities there, the water, the electricity, so that could be even built if necessary, so that for you just come and put in your machinery and start producing. I think, let me stop here, because we're going to hear more from the director when he comes in. Thank you so much.
Dr. Seru, thank you. We'll have more of him later on during the panel. Ladies and gentlemen, I had an honor of working on the AMA project as an investigative journalist and as a filmmaker. I traveled in different African countries to really assess where we are as a continent in terms of vaccine manufacturing. I'm happy to share with you today the work that took me 6 months to do, to just ground us in really where we are as a continent and the challenges at hand and what we have to do moving forward. This presentation comes before the keynote address that will take a deep dive into the different publications that have been written. For now, I'd love to invite your attention to the documentary titled Africa's Race to 2040. Let's roll it.
Mention COVID-19, and we all remember the loved ones we lost.
The bill will still undergo scrutiny in the Parliament's Health Committee.
Over 15 million people died. During the pandemic, according to the estimates from the World Health Organization. The pandemic caught us by surprise, overwhelming our health systems in both developed and developing countries alike. Medical workers on the front line fought on to the very end. Sometimes it was so hard to bear, watching people die as they gasped for breath. This was a state of emergency. What could save the world was a vaccine. For years, that's the fastest a vaccine has ever been developed, but most take about 5 to 10 years. Every second spent was a breath taken. Time was not on our side. Dozens of research teams around the world, largely from the global north, rushed to the labs to develop a vaccine for SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, using a mix of established techniques and technologies. Funding for a vaccine has never been greater, with billions of dollars invested in making a product that could help control the pandemic. The US, China, and Europe invested the most as different pharmaceutical companies started the race for a vaccine. Moderna and Pfizer had established themselves as the leaders in the race of vaccine development by developing a COVID-19 vaccine. Both companies published their initial clinical data between July and August. By 31st December 2020, Pfizer developed a COVID vaccine with an efficacy of about 95%. AstraZeneca followed later in February, Johnson & Johnson in March, Moderna in April, and many others as the months unfolded. With a vaccine in hand, vaccine nationalism was evident. Many high-income countries directly negotiated large advanced orders for the vaccines, leaving resource-limited countries scrambling for access. AstraZeneca said it had reached an agreement with several governments, including the UK and the US, to produce at least 2 billion doses of vaccines. At the time, Africa remained desperate for vaccines. Despite the existence of international structures like the COVID-19 Vaccine Global Access COVAX, Africa was left in the cold, unable to procure enough vaccines for its people. COVAX strategized its approach by promoting fundraising, coordinating vaccine donations from countries with surplus doses, and facilitating the expansion of the manufacturing capacity. After waiting for months, donations started trickling in from COVAX facilities and other countries from the global north and China. This was a big lesson for African leaders. In April 2021, African Union Commission and the African Center for Disease Control held a summit calling for a framework of action that will enable Africa to manufacture 60% of its own vaccines by 2040. In 2022, the Partnerships for African Vaccine Manufacturing, PAVAM, presented a framework that forms the blueprint of how the continent is going to achieve this goal by being self-reliant and meeting her vaccination needs. I'm investigative journalist Solomon Serwanja. I speak with African leaders, scientists, researchers, investors, and representatives from civil society to seek answers to what it will really take for Africa to manufacture 60% of its vaccines locally by 2040. It is 5th March 2023. African leaders, scientists, researchers, civil society, investors, and partners gather in Rwanda's capital Kigali for the Africa Health Agenda International Conference 2023. Top on agenda is a candid discussion on how the COVID-19 tested the resilience of our health systems and the lessons that we learned.
We are not investing adequately in the health workforce. We are not investing adequately in pandemic preparedness and response machinery. Neither are we investing adequately in the health system itself. We are living through the consequences of a failure to adequately invest and prioritize public health needs in Africa. And this is the very impetus of Africa CDC's call for a new public health order, guided by the principles of local ownership, of local leadership, of equity, of innovation, and self-reliance.
There is a lot of optimism in the room, premising on our experience, especially on how the global north handled this emergency.
Where these investments were made, there was infrastructure, there was capacity, there was capability already in place that they could leverage to then accelerate activities. And this is the issue when it comes to Africa. We need to gear ourselves up. We have started now largely because of the trigger of COVID to do so. That needs to gain momentum by an order of magnitude or two into the future. But I'm encouraged and optimistic that if we build on this surge that we've had in terms of interest around vaccine development and manufacture on the continent, then we can achieve something.
But it will take more than just hope, according to Patrick Tipot, the executive director of the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative. Patrick, who also doubles as the Chief Science and Innovations Officer at BioVac, a South African firm that produces vaccines, tells me that vaccine manufacturing takes huge investment, and therefore there are some guarantees that have to be made before anyone sinks a dollar into this venture, especially the market.
60% of the Gavi volumes come into Africa, so it's not trivial at all. So Gavi is a big market shaping player in Africa. And again, very encouragingly, Gavi is re-looking at its model to see how that can incentivize investments in vaccine production. But governments also have a role to play. The self-procuring countries need to put their money where their mouths are and come up with a plan that says, we will buy from local African producers as and when their products become available and meet the requisite quality requirements. We guarantee purchase from them.
But the guarantee of the market would require commitment from African states and their partners. For anyone to invest in vaccine manufacturing, numbers count.
Vaccine production relies on economies of scale to be cost effective. And the reason for that is that between 70% and 80% of the vaccine production costs are fixed costs. So the variable costs are only 20%, which means that as you increase volume, your costs don't increase proportionately. So when you build up to scale, the cost of goods go down, and that means that you can then begin to compete in the open market on a more competitive basis. So during that window period of 10 or years plus, African vaccine manufacturers require the support in terms of a premium that governments and other procuring agencies are prepared to pay in order to build this capacity, so that in the event of a pandemic, whenever it comes, we will have the capacity prepared and ready on the continent.
In some countries where economies of scale have been guaranteed, investments have already been made in research and development and setting up infrastructure for mass production. For example, BioVac in South Africa, Atlantic Life Science in Ghana, to mention but a few. Just to have a glimpse of what this means, I visited Cipla Quality Chemicals, a pharmaceutical manufacturing company located in Uganda's capital, Kampala. It is the largest pharmaceutical manufacturing plant in sub-Saharan Africa, certified by WHO to manufacture medicines for treating HIV/AIDS and malaria. Ajay Kumapal is the CEO of the pharmaceutical giant. The company produces and supplies 60 million doses of both antiretroviral drugs and antimalarials combined to over 18 countries across Africa.
Demand justifies what you can invest and how you're going to make sure there is return on that investment. So starting point for Africa is demand. There is progress with AFCFTA that we can move goods from one place to other place without any barriers. And there is huge amount of change we have seen. But to reach that point, Africa has to start look itself as one market with no barrier among each other. Because if we look into smaller countries, and some with population of 10 million people, some with population of 40 million people, some with population of 150 million people, and somebody wants to invest in a country with 10 million population, the market is too small to justify that investment.
Ajay, however, emphasizes partnerships and specialization. If Africa is to achieve its goal of producing both vaccines and pharmaceuticals to treat its population,
we can decide that one country takes a lead in research and development and one takes a lead in manufacturing. Easiest way to expand to is to add on to what you're already doing. So most easier companies to grow is those who are already established and they expand because they already have know-how, they already have support, they already have an understanding. For them, it's always easier to build more capacity. Second one is to partner with someone. And that partnership can be in various spaces with respect to what leg of pharmaceutical value chain you start. Do you start with packaging, or you start with manufacturing, or you do the core API production? Third could be for small innovations, specifically for innovative therapies, right? New, like in today's world, beyond mRNA, now DNA. Now those are smaller investment like innovators. And then you invest them as seed investment or startups. Then you outgrow them as they started to operate on a model which is successful, which could be defined by demand.
Speaking of research and development, one of the core programs of PAVAM is putting in place vaccine research and development centers and coordinating platforms. It all starts here. It is where the brain work begins, developing the vaccine. It takes scientists, sophisticated equipment, and heavy investment to get through the process of producing a vaccine. One such place is the Uganda Virus Research Institute, a center of excellence in research on viruses in Eastern Central Africa. Equipped with the state-of-the-art technology and machinery, as well as human resources, the center has been studying different viruses including HIV, Marburg, Ebola, and the latest COVID-19. Professor Pontiano Kalebu heads the institute.
For vaccine development, many people look at the end product of a vaccine, but there are so many things that are involved. For instance, we've been working at, if you want to have a vaccine, what immune response do you want to induce? Yeah? There are people here who have been studying for a long time to understand an immune response a vaccine should induce for HIV. Yeah? So they study the immune responses, that this is what is needed. That contributes to vaccine development. There are people who are looking at the viruses. What viruses do we have? And which composition to put into a vaccine? That's very important. Yeah? The people who are doing clinical trials, that's important. We have been looking at transmitted viruses to understand how they look so that we can design an HIV vaccine. We have not developed an HIV vaccine, but we have been contributing. But more recently, we have been, even before COVID, I can tell you, before COVID, we had one of our students, we collaborated with Imperial College to start a vaccine manufacture facility, yeah, for messenger RNA, interestingly, even before COVID. And we sent our student to London to design a vaccine for Rift Valley fever. He designed it, it went into mice, it was nice. Now he has reproduced it here. Yeah. And that, as he was doing this, that's when COVID came. So we started thinking about this even before COVID. So we have really students and scientists who are working on RNA vaccines here.
Though the process has been slow, the center is going into clinical trials for COVID-19 vaccine.
Currently, we're working on COVID vaccines, yeah, from the bench, from the lab. We have reached at a level where we want to test these vaccines in mice. That's easier. But to go into humans, you need good manufacturing practice. We don't have the facility. We have started talking to contract this out to others. And that is possible. You don't need to do the whole chain. You can design and have your IP, patent issues, you design the vaccine, then you contract another company to do the GMP because you have not reached, you don't have any facility that can do GMP. That is possible. You retain your scientific discovery and IP issues, but others can do the finer bits.
He, however, opines that Africa's focus on research and development has been rather blurry, with limited funding affecting their ability to do advanced vaccine research.
But there is not a lot of investment in research, as you know. We have not reached all the goals that African governments promised many years back to invest in research and development. That's a big problem. But also in manufacture, if you leave research and development alone, but also to develop the capacity to have facilities that are going to make vaccines and diagnostics and drugs at the international standards. We are very, very much behind. But we have been talking about this over a period of time. For many of you, you are hearing this because of COVID. I've been in many African meetings for years during the time of HIV/AIDS. We're talking about all this. How do we invest in research and development for vaccines. It's a little bit complicated.
Professor Kalebu is now mooting for the idea of African unity to collectively work together to develop and support different research and development centers of excellence. But as the interest for African states to invest in scientific research and development grows, Professor Kalebu is advocating for technology transfer.
As you know, in Africa, we have a few countries that have plants, manufacturing plants, about 6 of them. The low-hanging fruit is to really make negotiations with the vaccine developers to transfer so that they can do fill and finish. Some of these countries are doing that so that we can, South Africa, Senegal, Egypt, Morocco, and all that, so that we can, even without doing our own R&D, but negotiate intellectual property and markets and do that.
A classic example of where technology transfer has worked very well is in South Africa, where BioVac formed a partnership with Sanofi and Pfizer.
In summary, government went to these companies and said, we have a local vaccine manufacturer called BioVac. If you've won the tender for product 1, if you agree to transfer part of your technology to BioVac for localizing certain aspects of the vaccine manufacturing value chain, we would extend that tender by 3 years to a total of 5 years. So for 5 years, you would have unchallenged access to the South African market and supply to the Department of Health for your product. In the case of Sanofi, it was the Hexaxim. And it was attractive enough for Sanofi to consider that as a deal, formed a transaction with BioVac, and the rest is history, in that technology transfer has led to BioVac having vial filling and finishing capability that has been built up over a period of time.
But even with this, Neha Agarwal, the Global Diagnostics Programs Director at PATH, says that Africa needs to look beyond just technology transfer in vaccine manufacturing.
You know, I think technology transfer is something, it's easy on paper and very hard to do in reality. And so I think you need experts who've been there, that have done that have been integral to the actual innovation process. And I think that there are a lot of partners who are interested and really willing to support technology transfer. So I think we need to tap into that a bit more. When we think about things like, what are the various reagents and raw materials that we need to make a vaccine? A lot of those are hosted at places like NIBSC, the National Institute for Biologics and Standards, which is out of the UK. That's actually a government entity that runs that. And then there's other companies like the big pharmaceutical companies that do a lot of their antibody manufacturing themselves. They have very little incentive to make those reagents available to smaller scale manufacturers based in LMICs or even based in the global north.
Neha also argues that sustainable vaccine manufacturing will require financial independence from the global north, or better still, partnerships.
We need to localize the funding ecosystem, because if it's still global north partners funding the localization, what if funding dries up? What if there's another pandemic and all of a sudden research dollars go back to global north priorities? So the more we can take steps to localize the entire ecosystem, then only will we really have sustainability.
The issue of financing has been central to the discussion of Africa's dream of self-reliance on its pharmaceuticals and vaccines. Back at the Africa Health Agenda Conference, Dr. Magda Robalo poured her heart out to challenge African leaders and the private sector to take keen interest in funding the entire vaccine manufacturing value chain.
We need to look into our own internal resources and then look for external partnerships to complement our efforts, but it cannot be. It's a matter of sovereignty. You cannot have an ambitious goal of producing 60% of the vaccines your people need by 2040 and then sit and wait for foreigners to bring the money for you to do it.
Another key issue that has been raised by health experts is the establishment of quality management systems to ensure that all vaccines produced in Africa are at global standards. In fact, one of the programs of PAVAM is strengthening national regulatory agencies and regional centers of regulatory excellence. Dr. Margaret Sigonda is one of the people championing this cause. She is the head of health programs at the African Union Development Agency, NEPAD, and currently leading the regulatory workstream of the PAVAM framework.
With regulation, you can be assured that the patients will have access to safe, efficacious, and good quality medical products. Without it, the market will be flooded by substandard and falsified medical products, and that's a risk to public health. So you want to make sure that you have very robust systems to ensure that the risk posed by medicines is actually averted. And another good news is that on the continent, we already have 5 national regulatory agencies that have attained the WHO maturity level 3, which is really a criteria that is used to measure the robustness and the trustedness of your regulatory system in a country. So that is good news for Africa, because even for AMA, to have a strong AMA, you require strong national regulatory agencies. And so we think that with the 5 national regulatory agencies that have attained such a maturity status, then they can become like anchors and mentors to other regulatory agencies that are aspiring to also mature, and eventually we can have a really robust regulatory ecosystem on the continent once AMA is fully operational.
Dr. Sigonda is quite optimistic about the progress so far made on the regulatory framework and support to national and regional bodies.
And to date, as I'm speaking now, we already have some continental guidelines developed already to guide the member states in undertaking these activities. We've also been able to create what we call continental framework for vaccines lot testing and lot release. And essentially, this framework for vaccines testing and lot release is aiming at assisting especially vaccine-producing countries that do not have laboratory capacity to be able to benefit from those that have capacity. Currently, on the continent, we have South Africa that has capacity to do vaccines testing in lot release, and Egypt. These are the 2 countries. Others are still trying to build their capacity.
Their efforts to operationalize the African Medicines Agency, which will be the continental regulatory body to oversee vaccine manufacturing on the continent.
African Medicines Agency is a very critical piece when it comes to strengthening the regulatory ecosystem on the continent. And I think it should also be known that the African Medicines Agency is an offshoot of the African Medicines Regulatory Harmonization Initiative, because AMA is a treaty-based organization and it requires countries to ratify before they become members of the state parties of AMA. And so currently we only have 24 countries that have ratified and deposited the instrument of ratification with the African Union Commission. So it may take time to get all the countries on board, but the good thing is that since we already have an existing initiative, the African Medicine Regulatory Harmonization Initiative, which is catering for all the 55 member states, so it makes it easier to make sure that all the countries are supported and all countries are part and parcel of operationalization of the African Medicines Agency.
But as we wait for all countries to deposit their instruments of power to the African Medicines Agency, there are efforts to approve some vaccines that have been developed recently.
We are working on a program which is focusing on vaccines development for Lassa fever in West Africa. Lassa fever is a disease that is affecting mostly the West Africa region. And we've reached a point where we have dedicated, program to do epidemiological studies, but also R&D for vaccines for Lassa fever. And we are also capacitating the regulators and the ethics committee to be able to give the necessary approval so that such vaccines can be availed, can be accessible by the population in the Western African region. We're also looking into, for instance, Rift Valley fever that is affecting mostly sub-Saharan Africa. We're looking into how best can we use these structures that we have, the regional structures, the national regulatory agents, the ethics committee, to provide oversight on and making sure that we have such vaccines available to the people on the continent for diseases that affect us most.
At the tail end of the vaccine manufacturing value chain is the demand for the vaccines. It is one thing making the vaccines. It is another thing for the public to accept the vaccines. There is growing vaccine hesitancy among the population, which in itself is a challenge. Dr. Moses Mulumba is the Executive Director of Afya na Haki, a civil society organization whose focus is on promoting health and justice through the Afrocentric ideology. He argues that it is important to involve communities at the grassroots level in the vaccine manufacturing conversation.
The missing point in the entire conversations on vaccine and regional manufacturing is that we have kept it very high level. We've kept it at a policy level, and we are forgetting that the end is at the end user who is going to be benefiting. So we are not engaging them enough. People in the communities don't relate with the science that we are discussing. People at a country level are also not relating enough with the conversations at the African Union. And this is not surprising because we have seen that even at the sub-regional level, like at the East African community, at the SADC level, we are never capable of translating the conversations of sub-regional level to the national level. Now, if we can't translate that to the national level, a huge opportunity is missed. And it becomes very difficult for people at a country level and within communities to pick up these global regional important conversations.
He argues that communities are also central to holding governments accountable to their commitments if well mobilized by civil society.
This starts with community mobilization. Once the community knows what their governments have committed, through civil society organizations, through the patient groups, it is going to be very easy. We've seen that things like maternal mortality communities have been able to hold governments accountable. We've seen that people have been able to hold parliamentary conversations, and they have rejected budgets which parliaments are passing without increasing them. And in some sectors, we've seen improvement. So this is very, very important. Community mobilization and accountability mechanisms as part of the governance for these vaccines that we are talking about is going to be very central and critical.
Accountability, according to Dr. Mulumba, is advocating for legal and policy frameworks to support vaccine manufacturing and trade within Africa.
When I see positive narratives around the fact that it's possible to have 60% by 2040 vaccine manufactured on the continent, I think that is very promising. But we need to follow it up with political support, political will. We need to follow it up with coordination, proper partnerships that we need to be seeing. But we also need to be foresighted because we don't only need vaccines. There is a whole infrastructure that is required. How do you deliver the vaccines? How do you ensure that all these other commodities that accompany the vaccines are actually followed? And it's very important. So it's important that the ambition is there, but this ambition needs to be followed with policies and implementation of those policies.
Legal and policy frameworks will, however, not be the magic bullet. Professor Oyewale Tomori, a virologist from Nigeria, has been advocating for African unity as a means of achieving vaccine independence.
We need to look at diseases as another disease, as another colonial enemy. As another enemy which must combine together. As we overcame the colonial people, so also we will be able to overcome diseases by uniting together, bringing in all the resources we have. It's not every country in Africa that has every talent, but if we pull all our resources together, we can overcome and stop being a beggar to the world.
Unity, according to Professor Tomori, will also require pulling financial resources together to support vaccine manufacturing.
If all Africa decide we're going to buy our vaccine from Senegal, Senegal will be sustainable. But if we now say, oh no, we're waiting for bilateral assistance, we're waiting for donation, instead of putting our money into it, of course the man who gives you the donation is not going to let you buy from Senegal. He's going to let you buy from his own country. That's where the problem is, that division, not coming together. That's why it makes vaccine production in Africa unsustainable. But all we require, as I said, we cannot produce all the vaccine we need. But 4, 5, 6 of them have countries that have the capacity, let them produce the vaccine. And then every one of us in Africa will buy from that person. We will sustain it. And then they can even move on to other things in future. But so long as we are still have that mentality that, oh, donation has to come or something, we will never get to that level.
Africa's vaccine manufacturing agenda must be fronted with political will to provide great leadership and direction. Professor Tomori is now challenging leaders to rise to the occasion.
Long-term investment is what made Europe what it is today. Our own is a short-term thing sometimes. We have what you call political will. But political will is mere talk. It has to be backed up by commitment, and that's the fund. Is it that we don't have the fund? I don't think so. I think it's because we're misusing the funds we have, and that's why we're where we are today. How many resolutions have we signed in Africa? They are more than the disease that we feel, but what did we do with the resolution?
He fears that the worst could come in case we do not move fast.
Remember what happens. When the epidemic goes, that's the end of the epidemic, Africa forgets what is happening until the next one comes. The lessons we learned from the past one, we forget easily. And we start running helter-skelter when the next one comes. And I think that attitude has to change.
Nevertheless, he remains hopeful about the future.
I have hope. I will not be talking to you now if I didn't have hope. I'm 70-something years old, and I've been struggling for this for the last 50 years. If I'm still talking, it's because I have hope. And the hope may not be me, maybe me at the background to talk to you, but for you young people to take up Africa in your own hand and say, it should not be like what was happening to my grandfather.
Africa's dream of manufacturing 60% of its vaccine needs by 2040 is quite ambitious, but all of us have hope that if we start today by being deliberate about implementing the blueprint in the PAVAM commitment, hold ourselves accountable to the target set, we shall indeed get there. For now, though, I remain hopeful that one day we shall stop begging and start giving. Solomon Serwanja, AIJ unveils. Clap for me. Thank you very much. I know it's heavy, right? Oh, Professor, you're clapping for me again. Please do. Thank you very much. It's been quite heavy, yeah? So much to take in, but I hope it summarizes everything in the vaccine world and where we are as a continent. I know many of us have got the books, the research papers that have been given out just at the registrations table. This documentary pretty much summarizes those reports. It touches on aspects of research. It touches on aspects of the market, the business arm. It touches on a lot. Thank you for enduring 1 hour of heavy content, right? But I hope it will help us and it will shape the conversation as we go on. We want to say a special thank you to our partner, the Open Society Foundation, that are following up online. Ketho, thank you for being part of the conference today, as well as other online people who are following. Okay, we will be recognizing more of you as we go on, but for now, I want to invite Dr. Chabainze, who is the Director of Public Health, to come and say a word or two, and then we will invite our keynote speaker, Professor Ponchano Kalibu. Dr. Chabainze, you're very welcome. Dr. Daniel Chabainze is the Director of Public Health at the Ministry of Health. My very good friend, colleague. Yeah, sometimes we fight. Most of the times we are happy. But it's good to have you. Very welcome, sir. Karibu.
I'm still figuring where to stand. So you give me time as I locate my... That's fine. Distinguished guests, good evening. I think it's already evening, if not afternoon, because sitting in the closed room and listening to all the research gave me a feeling that we are so close, yet so far, in advancing vaccine manufacturing. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to give a small note on behalf of Ministry of Health, but basically to give a landscape where we think we are in terms of vaccine production and what we think should be our ideas as Ministry of Health going forward. As we've noted from the presentation, in light of the recent health challenges, notably COVID-19 pandemic, the imperative of timely vaccine manufacturing and equity access has never been more apparent. Despite Africa's significant population of approximately 1.48 billion and specific healthcare needs, we produce a mere 0.1 of the world's vaccines. This reality has led to significant slowed response to health emergencies. At present, our main contributor to vaccine is Gavi. Gavi is currently responsible for procuring 50% of the vaccine used in Africa. Obtains a mere 1% of the supply from African manufacturers. This number of vaccine is continuing to grow. Even some vaccines where we know all the diseases are in Africa are manufactured elsewhere. At a time, I want to mention that we are soon rolling out the malaria vaccine. And lo and behold, will we be able to produce it in Africa? "75% of the vaccines are secured from developing countries, sourced from developing countries and are manufactured elsewhere, 24% by multinationals. We urge Gavi to commit to sourcing a minimum share from the African manufacturers, even if initial costs will be high. This move can boost the competitiveness since increasing production volume lowers overheads and eventually reduces the unit price, which will ensure sustainability and accessibility of vaccines across the country and the continent. Allow me to speak about the few challenges that African manufacturers are faced. Listening to the production of what we saw on screen, I'm going to be repeating some of the things you've already heard. First of all, we can talk about technology transfer. It is one thing to say technology transfer, but there are multiple steps just even to transfer technology once a vaccine has already been produced. Manufacturers face hurdles in ramping up production, including financial constraints, procurement mechanism, and coordinating multiple stakeholders. Addressing these challenges requires development of robust business models, financial support, and strong national and regional coordination mechanisms. Those have all been highlighted in the video that we saw. Despite these challenges, progress is underway with over 30 vaccine manufacturing initiatives across the continent, moving us towards the set goal for the African Union to supply 60% of its vaccine needs by 2040. About 3 weeks ago, I had an opportunity to speak with the people at WHO. We have this African Manufacturing Agency. We need to have all countries sign up and set the ball rolling for the board. Unfortunately, in the region, there are some countries which have not yet proposed their representatives, so the board is not fully constituted. So we are delaying our own progress. However, this effort to accelerate manufacturing demands significant support and investment, and these are the critical areas allow me to mention. First, to facilitate knowledge exchange. By sharing research findings and best practices, we seek to foster collaboration among stakeholders, driving innovation in vaccine development and production. Number 2 is strengthen capacity. We must enhance the local institutions and healthcare professions' ability in vaccine manufacturing, distribution, and administration. Thirdly, advocate for policy support. Through policy advocacy, we need to garner support for indigenous vaccine manufacturing capacities and ensure equitable access to vaccines for all Africa. And number 4, we need to foster partnership, collaboration between government, academia, industry, international organization will be pivotal in accelerating progress towards the regional vaccine sustainability. Let me pause and talk about what resources we have even before we talk about vaccine manufacturing. There is what we call the PAB systems of pathogen access and benefit sharing, which is being modeled under the pandemic treaty. We realize that for us to have a vaccine, everybody has made a contribution. This biodiversity of organisms came from somewhere. We are contributing a lot of research that we've not been able to track as Africa, so that we can share some of the benefits. I had Professor Kalebu in the video commenting how many researches are being done as collaborations. But eventually, most times, we only see the vaccine produced and marketed to us. Without having a footprint of where the original clinical trials were done to share benefits, where the vast virus or biodiversity or organisms were first described and picked. We can talk about Ebola. We are soon going to be buying the vaccines. Ebola has only broken out in African countries, basically. That's where the research has been doing mostly. But I wonder how much of the benefit is going to come back to us. So, as we say we want to do vaccine manufacturing, we should come to the table and negotiate. We have already made a contribution. As a nation, because everything belongs to the state, or as researchers, we should be having a chance to negotiate and sign and push for some of these benefits that we've already provided in the research world. That said, we need to establish a resilient manufacturing industry in Africa. Requires collaboration among governments, donors, and manufacturers. Whereas we think our governments do not have enough resources at the moment to provide for vaccine manufacturing, we do have enough resources to invest in the training, teaching, and research. That will be our first entry point. Many of the people you find in this developed world have also been trained. Some of them are coming from our countries. We should have an opportunity to attract them back and also contribute to the development in their countries. By investing in local production, bolstering supply chain, and enhancing distribution networks, we can ensure vaccines reach those that need them regardless of the location. The world in Africa waited for 2 years to get the first vaccine. That was a lot of anxiety when we don't know whether COVID is going to kill everybody on the African continent because we didn't have any assurance of vaccine. When COVAX came in, we also signed many agreements which up to now hurt our economies. And if we had been transparent enough, we would have put clauses saying, should the disease burden go down, should the demand go down, please don't supply the vaccine. We are going to remain paying for some of these vaccines even when they were not utilized because of the kind of agreements that our governments or the people who made the vaccines signed. That has given us a chance to prepare for the future. We need to manufacture our own vaccines. Since we are waiting for the next pandemic in 50 years from now, I hope you heard me right, there's going to be no pandemic in the next 50 years. So we better prepare right and prepare appropriately. As we embark on the journey, concerted effort are paramount. By mobilizing resources, fostering collaboration, and driving positive change, we can build a healthier, more resilient future for Africa and the world together. Together, let's champion vaccine equity and forge a path towards a brighter tomorrow. Thank you very much. Mr. Seranja, you can come for the next fight.
Thank you. Can we love on Dr. Chavanze once again? I have shared both national and international panels with Dr. Chavainza. He's always a brilliant person, and we'll be hearing more from him. I love the fact that you mentioned that we have, as a continent, really be focused on funding this process of vaccine manufacturing. When I was doing this documentary, and I'll let you share your views before I can have Professor come to give his keynote, and I hope the back-end team, you have the presentations ready if there are any. I got this feeling when we were filming this documentary that we all know what to do. I mean, when you listen to the brilliant brains of the different people we interviewed, we know what to do. Right from research, we know what to do about partnerships. We talked about technology transfer. We talked about fill and finish. We talked about the access to the markets. We talked about the need for communities to be involved. We talked about our independence. I started to ask myself one question. Why aren't we doing it? I mean, we talked to brilliant minds in this documentary. And if we know what to do, then why aren't we doing it? That will be the question that I'll be asking you to share your thoughts on. Let's put our hands together and welcome our keynote speaker, Professor Pontiano Kalevo. It's my singular honor, sir, to invite you to come and give us your keynote address. Can we help put this back, please, so that it helps? Professor, you're very welcome. Karibu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Serwanja. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me to come here to give this presentation. I'm very, very honored and humbled to speak to this audience, distinguished audience. I was given the task of talking about advancing local pharmaceutical and vaccine manufacturing using Afrocentric approaches. But as I listened to the previous speakers and to the film that was shown, I realized that my presentation needs to get shorter and shorter because you have touched on some of the issues really I wanted to talk about. But before I give my presentation, I want to thank Haki for the advocacy, the work you are doing. I think you are filling a real space. When I was told to give this presentation, I thought I was not the best person to talk about all this. But I was also given the opportunity to look at your website, to see that work you have done. And I read some of them. I was very impressed, actually. And we just need to encourage you to do more so that you can advocate and really write on those issues that we are confronted with. I'll talk a little bit of a repeat of what has been said, but I'll also try to tell you once again, the film did demonstrate that, a bit of what we are trying to do to fill the space. You have heard about the challenges that we face, the limited capacity to do manufacturing, very few pharmaceutical manufacturers in sub-Saharan Africa, yet the population is quite big, and a lot of our products are coming from elsewhere. We have talked about the challenges that we face. There are financial challenges, technical challenges that we face, the challenges of the market, the local market that has been emphasized. I can tell you the business of manufacturing is not a simple one. And somebody said here one of the manufacturers said he rather is making more money in the quencher than in pharmaceuticals because of the complication of the industry itself. We're trying as much as we can to push our pharmaceutical industry in Africa. And we have been told about the many activities that have been done within Africa, within the region, to boost our manufacturing. According to the National Drug Authority, the registered manufacturing companies in Uganda currently produce about 173 pharmaceutical products that include painkillers, antibiotics, cough and cold syrups, allergy products, creams and ointments. And many are generics, as you know. International organizations like WHO, with funding from the European Union, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, UNIDO, and other aid agencies have provided substantial support for strengthening pharmaceutical production in Africa. You have heard about other efforts to support the industry, including the Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Plan for Africa, PMPA, which was developed in the framework for the new Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD, in 2007. But as you have heard, pharmaceutical industry in the region faces many challenges. But also the regulation needs improvement. We are told that the National Drug Authority has made efforts to ensure our quality systems are improved, and many companies follow good practices, with some with good manufacturing practice. However, they face challenges in meeting WHO standards, which cost an enormous amount of money. According to the CEO of the Kampala Pharmaceutical Industries, we are told that in Uganda, there's only, if this is true, there's only one company that has WHO pre-qualification, that's CIPRA. Only one company that has WHO pre-qualification. But according to the CEO of Kampala Pharmaceuticals, he says that if you aim for the absolute highest quality in terms of the way the products are made, it comes at a tremendous cost. And this will mean that our products will be unaffordable for our people. But he assures us that our regulators are good and that most of the products from our local manufacturers here in Uganda will pass international standards. I hope that is the case. Yeah? Absolutely. So the issue of standards can affect market of our medicines. So there is a need to strengthen and harmonize in the region so that the national regulatory authorities within Africa come together, coordinate their activities, and rely on the work of one another. And I'm very happy about this African Medicines Agency that is being planned. I don't know how far it has gone, but I think that is where to move. We are told there are several efforts that have been made to improve the regulation in the region. For example, the East African Community Medicines Regulatory Harmonization, which is a regional program that is part of the Continental Initiative. The Africans Medicines Regulatory Harmonization, which has been mentioned here, and many others. Of course, the competition, pharmaceutical companies face a lot of competition in the region. We are told that about 80% of the products in East Africa are imported from outside, primarily from India and China, but also from Europe, Malaysia, and other countries. And India and China governments give some subsidies to their manufacturers. There are also issues which we have discussed, Solomon mentioned, the counterfeit medicines, and many other challenges. Lack of raw materials. I was reading somewhere we need cassava, maize to make our tablets, pills, but I'm told the cassava and maize here is not good. And they have to import this starch from elsewhere. And also the production is not adequate. Is that true? So there's a big gap. But I want to concentrate on the gap, another gap that we have. That is the limited research and development that is being conducted. Innovation. Before we talk about manufacture, before we talk about markets, there must be innovation for new drugs, for new molecules, for new targets. And this is very, very limited in Africa. And for that reason, we are still mostly, many of our pharmaceuticals are relying on generic drugs. Research and development requires investment. We know it is expensive. We start from the bench. You do preclinical studies. We talk about GMP to move the products from preclinical to clinical, and then intellectual property protection. We at the Uganda Virus Research Institute and some other research institutions in the region have made some limited efforts to identify drug targets for HIV, malaria, and other endemic pathogens. We have had students, we have had many researchers who have done very good work, and they have shown us that some of and they have published, but they cannot move their work forward into product development for many reasons, including funding and the limited technology. And sometimes some of the work that we have done by our young scientists has been taken on by others to move towards product development, a very big challenge. We need to invest in research if Africa wants to be independent moving forward. We are studying at the Uganda Virus Research Institute, as you have heard in the film, studying our viruses. We grow our viruses. We study immune responses. We do a lot of the basics, but we need more funding to push forward. We have many of our researchers who have done mostly clinical studies. And Daniel mentioned the clinical trials that we do using other people's products from the north. And many institutions in Africa do very good clinical studies at the highest standards. And the pharmaceutical companies now are very attracted to come here to do their clinical trials. But of course, after the trial, they move away with their product. So we need to fill that gap. There are also efforts to develop our traditional medicine. Many times you use the word traditional medicine and Western medicine. But for me, I hesitate to use those two terms. I use the terms scientific approach and non-scientific approach. I think the gap we have with our traditional medicine is the limited use of scientific approaches to advance our knowledge. The so-called Western medicine has developed because they use scientific approaches to identify interventions. Our traditional medicine field needs to do the same, leading to the identification and purification of the active substances and the eventual conduct of clinical studies. During COVID, Preside, and I see Brenda here, I thought the Honorable Minister will be here. Preside funded some of the clinical studies of traditional medicines, creating what they call the clinical trials of natural therapeutics, CONAT group. That is the way to go. And our contribution with the funding from Preside, and now the Minister of Science and Technology and Innovation, we have come up with what we call In Vitro Studies Natural Therapeutics of Uganda program. And I've been talking to Brenda about this program just a few minutes ago. In this work, what we're doing in vitro studies. We have set up assays that can test herbal medicines for their effect to kill or inactivate viruses and bacteria. And also to check whether these products are toxic to the cells. You know, we have many herbs and herbalists who make a lot of claims, and then they go to market their products. We have now set up a channel where we can test some of these products. We have developed very good protocols that meet international standards. After our studies, decisions are then made to move these products further to animal studies or to the clinical trials of Natural Therapeutics CONAT group for further testing in human clinical trials. Here we are, still not looking for the active ingredient, which is a big gap, as I mentioned, but use the products that have been given to us to study them in the lab, their effect on cells and on the viruses. And this is no threat to the intellectual property. There has been a gap of herbalists and those who have medicine between them and the scientists, with a fear of stealing their inventions. We clearly state that we are not threatening their intellectual property. All we are doing them to help them to move their products forward. It is very interesting to tell you that the demand for this work is going up higher and higher and higher. So there are many herbalists who want their products to come to be tested in our labs so that their products can move forward. So you can see what is missing is a platform to provide the right science to some of our herbalists and others who are working on these drugs to move their products forward. We're expanding these activities so that we can also look at products that are claiming to be anti-diabetic and many others with support from science, the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation. And we're working very closely with the other institutions like the Natural Chemotherapeutics Institute and Wasitama University. And this is the way to go. Let's not call ourselves traditional medicine, Western medicine, but the gap is using science in what we are doing. The topic today is mostly on vaccines. I've dealt on a bit on the pharmaceutics, but I want to say a little bit about vaccines. I did attend the meeting that was shown in Kigali, but I did attend virtually, where at that meeting in Kigali, the African Union and Africa Centers for Disease Control in April 2021 held a meeting with the topic of expanding Africa's vaccine manufacturing for health security. And there were two major commitments, major outcomes. A commitment to developing a detailed framework for action with the key milestones on the way to reaching 60% local manufacturing of Africa's routine medicine vaccines needs by 2040, instead of the 1% manufactured regionally today. And the second aim or outcome was the launch of the Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing by His Excellency Felix Tshisekedi, the chair of the African Union at that time and the president of DRC. Achieving the African Partnership on African Vaccine Manufacturing vision would mean that we need to develop and manufacture and produce at least 1.5 billion vaccines doses per year by 2040. A massive and complex undertaking. And as you have heard locally, at the moment. So only about 1% of the total continental demand that is manufactured in Africa, in a few countries. The remaining is coming from other suppliers, including established suppliers in India, who have provided 70% of Gavi supply and have up to 40% for self-procuring countries. Most African countries are supplied with vaccines by UNICEF, supported by Gavi and others. And also, we have heard that almost all the current vaccine capacity in Africa is focused on supplying the internal country markets, with very little export taking place. There's very limited upstream production, with most local companies only engaging in packaging and labeling, and occasionally fill and finish steps. To succeed and be able to implement the framework for action, there's a need for commitment, including funding, good planning, being realistic, so that not every country aim for the same. This should be an African initiative. I cannot overemphasize that vaccine development is very difficult, more difficult than pharmaceuticals. It is complex, it is very risky and costly, includes clinical development, process development, and asset development. The risk is quite high. Most vaccine candidates fail in the preclinical or early clinical development. And normally, it's about 1 in every 15 candidate vaccines entering phase 2 that achieve licensure. So the high failure rate is a result of many reasons. That is, if you are to move from design to making a vaccine. I'm not talking about using antigens from other developers. COVID gave us a hope that more could be done. You have heard of all the initiatives that were done in South Africa, Rwanda, and many places to set up capacities, especially in the area of messenger RNA production. For instance, in 2020, Aspergen Pharmacare in South Africa agreed and signed an agreement with Johnson & Johnson to fill and pack and supply the J&J vaccines. South African Biovac, you saw in the film, also undertook the fill and finish of the Pfizer vaccine. They made the vaccines. But when they made the vaccine, actually, there was no market. And some of you remember the president of South Africa saying they have to close these plants because there was no market for these vaccines. We were getting free vaccines. The market was heavily loaded with vaccines from elsewhere. So even the vaccines that were being made in South Africa could not find a market. In February 2022, the World Health Organization announced that 6 African countries were chosen to receive the tools needed to produce messenger RNA. That was Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, Senegal, South Africa, and Tunisia. But also, South African biologics and vaccines. They said they have a hub, and they announced that they are going to replicate the Moderna vaccine by using publicly available information without the company's vaccine. But the WHO efforts failed, and I think South Africa's efforts failed because Moderna put up a case. They faced intellectual property and patent challenges. The South African president and others appealed Why the delays to approve the TRIPS? That's the trade-related aspect of intellectual property. To waive some of these IP issues, intellectual property, during pandemics. But this came late. Efforts are still continuing. BioNTech has just recently moved their containers to Rwanda to produce RNA vaccines. I attended a meeting last year of Grand Challenges in Senegal, Dakar, where Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation announced new investment to advance and access messenger RNA research vaccine manufacturing to Senegal and South Africa using the technology of quantum biosciences to produce messenger RNA. There are many other African countries during COVID that had hopes of making vaccines. In the north, Egypt, Morocco, Algeria were to make the Russian Sputnik and China's Sinovac. I don't know where this has ended. You may do more, but I don't know where this has ended. COVID is now down, and I think the pressure is down, but we need to sustain this. For those who have followed the Dave by Pharma drugs and vaccines manufacturing plant at Matuga by Mr. Magola. It is a multi-billion manufacturing plant. I had a chance to look on the computer. I hope that's how it looks. Brenda. Yes. This is a very ambitious project that requires, I understand, $1 billion. They did face financial challenges and they needed government bailout. The plan for this plant is that, this is what they're telling us, it will have USA FDA, European Medicines Agency, and WHO pre-qualification so that they can access international market. If the aim is to manufacture vaccines for different platforms, as they say, messenger RNA, vectors, proteins, etc., it is a very ambitious project. But if it works, it will be a game changer in the region. And we pray it works. But still the gap that remains is that we are all concentrating our energy, as I said, for pharmaceuticals, on manufacturing and getting antigens and products from elsewhere, but less on research and development to design antigens and platforms, especially for the diseases that are common in our area. I would now like to talk about what we at Uganda Virus Research Institute are doing to make a contribution in the area of vaccines. The work on vaccine development at the Uganda Virus Research Institute is not new. In the 1940s, the first attenuated Rift Valley fever vaccine was developed at UVRI. This is called the Smith-Mann attenuated vaccine that is still in use in veterinary medicine. Did you know that? UVRI already has extensive experience in conducting clinical trials, just as for pharmaceutics, for vaccines as well, to the final products of licensure. We are now conducting what we call controlled, or about to conduct what we call controlled human infection studies for schistosomiasis vaccine research. This is where you have a vaccine, you vaccinate an individual, and then expose that individual to a pathogen to see if the vaccine can protect. We have gone through the regulation, the ethics, and we are ready. It has been successful done for malaria. As you heard in the film, we actively study protective immune responses that the vaccine should induce, or correlates of protection, and designed assays to measure these responses. We identify vaccine targets or epitopes, among others. The film clearly mentioned that before COVID-19 in 2018, we had embarked on a project funded by the UK Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council under a project called Future Vaccine Manufacturing Hub to develop a Rift Valley fever vaccine and to create a small-scale modular GMP. And the plan was to have a PhD student design this vaccine in the UK and come and replicate it at UVRI, test the quality of the product, introduce GMP compliance systems in a small lab, and compare the quality with the quality of the vaccine made in UK. The vaccine was made, it was immunogenic in mice, but the plans for our GMP work were cut short by the COVID pandemic. But we made a self-amplifying RNA vaccine. When COVID came, we were mobilized by Honorable Monica Musenero at the encouragement of His Excellency the President to work together to develop interventions, that is diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines for COVID-19. We attended the meeting. I mobilized our scientists. We attended the meeting. And we at UVRI committed to develop 2 vaccines for COVID. One, an inactivated vaccine, and another one using a vector. I introduced the idea of messenger RNA. But that time, messenger RNA vaccines were not very much known. And that idea was not very, very much attractive to a few people around. But the support from Preside and later from the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation has allowed us to venture into vaccine design, to learn more about the regulatory processes and GMP processes, as I'll mention briefly. Currently, we are working on 5 different vaccines, 2 for COVID-19, funded by the Ministry of Science, Technology and Innovation. We are still working on a self-amplifying Rift Valley fever vaccine, initially funded by the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council of UK. Later, we got funding from the UK MRC. Now we are partly funded by the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative to move this product forward. And we're working with our colleagues at Makerere University. We have tested these vaccines in mice, and they are immunogenic. We have also got funding from IAVI to work on an HIV messenger RNA vaccine using what we call a trimer envelope. And this is funded by the USAID and IAVI. And more recently, we have got funding from the UK Innovate to work on the Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever virus vaccine using a chimp adeno platform. The funding from Preside and Ministry of Science and Technology has allowed us as UVRI to develop our own chimp adeno platform that we can use for different vaccines. 3 of our vaccines, as I've mentioned, have gone into mice. And the next step, if all goes well, is to make GMP batches or seed stocks for human trials. We have sent a few colleagues of ours to different places to learn about GMP. We have worked very closely with the regulators, institutional and national, like Uganda National Council of Science and Technology and the NDA. We have presented our protocols to the Animal Ethics Committee, working with the colleagues at Makerere University for the preclinical studies. We have worked with the Ministry of Science and Technology on IP issues, and the resulting intellectual property of our vaccine is jointly owned by the inventor, the principal investigator, the grantee, which is UVRI, and the government of Uganda, with equitable benefit sharing mechanism. For our adenovirus platform, we have followed the relevant international intellectual property Uganda laws with the initial filing with the Uganda Registration Services Bureau for IP protection before we filed to the African Regional Intellectual Property Organization, ARIPO. ARIPO encompasses 20 African countries, and we have already, a notification has already gone to these countries. The applicants are the grantee, the host institution, UVRI, the funder, Minister of Science Technology, the inventor. For our chimp adeno, the principal investigator and the inventor is Dr. Sheila Balinda. We at UVRI, we have already paid for the filing of the intellectual property, $3,000, but we need to continue protecting this patent through the maintenance fee. The challenge with the ARIPO, it has limited geographical protection. But going for wider protection, and these are some of the challenges we face, the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, can be very expensive, and hence limiting our intellectual property protection. I'll be attending a meeting, the International Conference on Innovation, Intellectual Property and Technology Transfer in Africa's pharmaceutical sector on the 25th to 26th of March 2024 in Addis Ababa, where we are going to discuss a number of issues. I've been requested to participate in a panel discussion under the title Technology Gaps in Public Sector R&D in Africa, Taking Stock of the Current Challenges. As we speak now, we don't have a GMP facility to move our vaccines forward. But this is being discussed. All the same, our staff are getting a lot of training and knowledge exchange in this area. Some have been to many places to learn in biological developments and manufacturing. We are also discussing with African colleagues. For example, we have applied for funding on a project called Epsilon, where we plan to design a messenger RNA vaccine for Rift Valley fever and Crimean Congo. And we have been discussing with the African Biologics and Vaccines in Cape Town, a Cape Town-based biotechnology company, and they have provided us with the costs to make our vaccine at GMP level. So I think moving forward, even if we have a challenge of having GMP facilities, we can work with others to move our vaccines forward into human trials while retaining our intellectual property. We also talked to colleagues in Rwanda Regional Center of Excellence for Vaccines and Immunization, who have recently got the BioNTech GMP facility, whether they could work with us to move our vaccines. But of course, the agreements they have with BioNTech does not make them feel this is still currently a Rwandan property. So the negotiation could not go far. I'd like now to make some conclusions. I think from all that we have heard and listened to, Africa needs to continue all efforts to strengthen our pharmaceutical and vaccine manufacturing using an Afrocentric approach. Nationalistic approaches alone may not be able to take us very far. We need to address some of these challenges like regulation, capacity building, and GMP and markets as a region. We need to strengthen our regulation to meet international standards and find ways to make WHO pre-qualification affordable. You have all seen the steps that have been made from R&D to manufacture. It is very expensive, and government funding alone will not be enough. We need mechanisms to broaden funding, including public-private partnerships. I think I've briefed you and convinced you that we at UVRI, we are making our contributions. I've shown you the science we're doing, our work to bring traditional medicine and science into traditional medicine, And I've shown you our efforts to design vaccines. It is my wish that we continue to take advantage of the momentum and awareness caused by COVID pandemic to strengthen the manufacturing capacity in Africa. As I end, I wish to acknowledge the following. Some of the sources of information that I provided included those from Haki, as I mentioned, their website and document, very good documents. The interview I saw with the CEO of Kampala Pharmaceuticals Industries, Mr. Nazim Mohammed. But I also wish to acknowledge the Minister for Science, Technology and Innovation for the support and funding, especially from the Honorable Minister. Brenda, you pass on my message. The Minister of Health, our ministry, for the support. His Excellency the President, he keeps calling us to give him updates on our vaccine, which is very good. The UK, RI and MRC, UK, IAVI, USAID, and more recently UK Innovate, that has given us £2 million to develop the Crimean Kong vaccine. I'd like to acknowledge UVRI and my colleagues working on therapeutics and vaccine development, especially Jennifer Serwanga, Paul Kato. Jennifer works on the inactivated vaccine. Paul Kato Kitandwe works on the Rift Valley self-amplifying RNA vaccine. Sheila Balinda works on the adenovector vaccine. And Jackie Chosimire Rugemwa, who is working on our in vitro studies. Finally, once again, I thank Haki for the invitation to give this keynote address. Thank you.
Another round of applause to Professor Pontiano Kalebu, the right person to give this keynote address. Thank you for taking us deeper into your world. And by the way, you just heard him mention some of the staff members. The people mentioned on that list are professors. I was there, Sheila, amazing team, amazing, brilliant people. Professor Kalebu has told me he has trained so many people at the Uganda Virus Research Institute who have gone to work for the big pharma because they cannot be absorbed very well. I think he didn't mention about that, but he did mention to me that in terms of human resource, the Uganda Virus Research Institute has done absolutely well in getting the human resource that we want. Unfortunately, we are not able to have them all. So thank you very much, Professor Pontiano Kalebu. We'll be making some reactions to the keynote address, and I would love to invite Dr. Dennis Chivira. Dr. Dennis, you're very welcome. Please come and have your seat. I also want to invite Dr. Adrian Dungu to please come and take your seat. I would love to invite Dr. Frank Kalebu. Please come and take your seat. I would also want to invite Dr. Sharifa Kwezi. Please come and take your seat. I hope in 2 years I'll also be called Dr. Solomon Serwanja. Because now if you're interviewing doctors, really. I also want to invite my dear friend and colleague, Joan Chilande. Please come and take your seat as we have a conversation on this. Looking at the program, I promised you that we'll be out of this place by 5:30. And clearly, I just looked at my clock and it's 10 minutes past 5. So I'll ask a few questions to my panelists so that we can have this. Firstly, I think I'll start with Dr. Chivira. Your reaction to the keynote address, what stood out for you, and your comment basically on the keynote address. You're welcome, Dr. Chivira.
Thank you, Solomon. Thank you, Solomon. And thank you, Haki, for this dissemination meeting. My quick reactions to Professor's submission. Professor, thank you very much. I think for me this is very heartwarming to know and to hear what Uganda is being able to do. And I think from also the challenges you mentioned, I think this platform is very good. I was looking at my colleague Adrian from the Uganda Manufacturers Association when you were talking about looking for a GMP compliant facility to help move the work forward. But the key issues you've put across there and that have been highlighted in all the discussions today, I think come through. And I hope we can go away from this meeting creating the linkages. Because what you're able to do as Ugandans, we haven't seen, we do not know. So it's making that work visible. It's trying to see the collaborations we have in the country to move it forward. I think one of the key challenges that keeps coming up is the issue of financing. But at another meeting, a regional meeting we had last year, we had someone from the African Development Bank that is stuck with $5 billion and there is no viable institution coming up to request for a substantial amount. And what I've heard from the bank actually is that a few Ugandans are also going there individually. We all want, when we hear there is a piece of cake somewhere, we all want to go and pick for ourselves. But I think this is time for us to come together and say, okay, as a country, what is it that we are contributing in this value chain of vaccine manufacturing, of diagnostics manufacturing? And for me, it's been heartwarming hearing from you that we are doing well on research. Is it something that we think as a country we need to invest? You say you're training young scientists that are going away to earn, and it's good for them to go and earn for themselves. But I think as a country, then we are bleeding when we let this go. So making these linkages is very good. I think the other thing apart from finances that keeps coming up, that these initiatives we've looked at the African regional level. And if you ask which Ugandan is pushing the agenda of the pharmaceutical manufacturing plan for Africa, you'll not get any voice there. The Partnership for African Vaccine Manufacturing, that now it's in its 2 years of implementation, what's happening there? Do we even know? Who is speaking for us at these platforms? How can we as a country benefit? Who is speaking the same language as Professor is speaking in UVRI, so that we can see how to contribute? So I think for me, so far, it's heartwarming. How do we take it on from here so that it's not yet, we don't just come here and speak and then go home and we wait for another conference. Thank you.
Dr. Chibira, I remember I attended that meeting where, a financier came and said he's stuck with $5 million. There was a group that had a group of manufacturers, I think Dr. Dungu will speak to that had a separate meeting to see how they could coalesce and apply for this money to support that. But perhaps Dr. Adrian Dungu will speak to that. Dr. Sharifa, your response?
Just before Dr. Sharifa comes in, the Vatican also has a pool of funding for African pharmaceutical manufacturing, another 6 billion. If all of us keep trying to go alone, we're not going to get anywhere. So, yeah. Yes.
So we're looking at about $11 million. Billion. Jesus Christ. $11 billion up for grabs. So maybe Professor Kalebu, we can apply to get funding for our research and development at the Uganda Virus Research Institute. How many of us here have been at UVRI? By show of hands. I challenge you to get time and visit. Dr. Mulumba, have you been at UVRI? Countless times. You have not been there. Okay. If you get an opportunity and visit the Uganda Virus Research Institute, Professor Kalebu will welcome you, and he will show you some of the latest technology and machines that they have bought, expensive machinery, and yet he tells me we still want more. So maybe it's an opportunity to tap in. Dr. Sharifa, would love to hear from you. Dr. Sharifa is from the Uganda Investments Authority. Would love to get your reactions on the keynote address.
Good evening, everyone. It is an honor to be with you here today. After listening to the speakers before, Professor, I would like to take this opportunity to say I'm honored that my country is able to do such great things. And we really thank you at the Research Center. Our country is blessed with over 10 colleges and universities that handle pharma studies, and we also have 4 top-notch research centers. So I think as Uganda, we're in position to produce our own pharmaceuticals. We just need to be a bit more organized. Like doctor said, you can't eat a piece of the cake for yourself. We have to go as a team. We have to go as a country, and then we will be able to achieve our goals. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. Just to stay with you maybe for a second, I think the Uganda Investments Authority also has a role to play in terms of attracting investors into Uganda. And have we had a big response on investment in the pharmaceutical sector? The appetite to invest in the pharmaceutical sector in Uganda, and if so, where are we?
Well, at Uganda Investment Authority, our key mandate is to advocate, attract, and promote investment in the country. And pharmaceuticals is one of the leading sectors that the Uganda Investment Authority has picked on. Now, when it comes to if we have any big investors, these are now more of inside table conversations. But when they come and they are ready to be given out to the public, I hope this will be shared.
All right, interesting. I will speak more on that as we go on. Dr. Adrian Dungu, as a manufacturer and someone who has been in the vaccine industry space, would love to hear from you, your general overview on the keynote address.
First of all, I would like to thank Haki for organizing this engagement. And I am so happy to hear from Dr. Caleb regarding the developments at UVRI. And as a fellow scientist who's engaged in manufacturing, I keenly followed with interest because everything was fascinating to me, especially the research programs. I love the way you've tried to mobilize funding to deliver on research, because this is one of the problems we hustle with a lot. And I'm pleased that you are near realizing a product that you want to develop through your research program. However, one thing I would love to elaborate, maybe this could be of interest to you going forward. Research organizations tend to develop products, but when they get into commercialization of these products, that's not a niche of their strength. That's why you are finding difficulties down that lane. And another factor which maybe has not come out clearly is regarding the capacities of production that you are targeting. So when you look at companies you approached in South Africa, maybe they put a minimum order quantity that is beyond your needs or ability to engage in a continuous process of manufacturing. So that is where we realize that going forward, we need a further collaboration between the manufacturers we have, research institutions, and government. One of the core key factors to tackle would be the concern of developing policies that are attached to our areas of prime interest. So as a country, we have not yet developed those in the health sector. And as institutions like UVRIs develop their own priority targets, and they use the limited funding to try to to tackle those issues. So another concern which I would elaborate more onto regarding the financing. So one of the bottlenecks, like as well Dr. Chibula has mentioned, there are institutions which have funding. African Development Bank, I think, has around $3 billion of funding ready for use. Afrexim Bank also has a fund of around 3 to 5 billion, if I recall well. But when you look at the structure of requirements they need for access to this funding, you realize that the majority of companies almost on the entire continent cannot meet that criteria. IGI for African Development Bank, the minimum capital they can give you is $30 million with a tenure of around 5 to 8 years. So you realize that companies want to borrow around 5 million, 10 million. So it won't really qualify for such a fund. And secondly, this is a matter we've been raising a lot with the financial institutions. When you approach them for funding, the requirements are out of scope in relation to what we need in the pharma sector. So we've developed a criteria of trying to advise them to change their policies tailored to what we need in the pharma sector. So actually last week we had a team from African Development Bank. I mobilized their meeting with us in the pharma sector. And actually we are developing a new policy paper for them that is going to be tailored to the needs of our sector so that they try to make those requirements as to make them in a way that they are easily implementable for companies' needs. So I think this is one of the issues associations can do better with financial institutions and governments, because when we are discussing as an association, we don't discuss at a level of the interests of one company, because one company will have abilities it can deliver that may not meet the needs of a government or a financial institution. But as an association, you are able to bridge all those gaps together and find a solution that meets all stakeholders into play in order to arrive at the same goal. So that's one key factor I can elaborate into. Then maybe another concern, which we didn't discuss more regarding the regulatory authority involvement. So as our Dr. Caleb has explained, all this research is ongoing, but we've not talked about what has the regulatory authority done in this area. Have they monitored EU yet? I doubt so. So this shows you that you may take one road alone, but you will not reach where you want to reach if you are not moving together with the people you need to move with. So a journey which is taken with all the players required at the same pace, you are easily going to achieve the end result. So where we are having developments by UVRI, and I really, they are extraordinary. I really support what they are doing. But where are our regulators? Where are our industries to them? Because without us going to the level where they are, we won't support their research. They should be more focused on research, and then we do the commercialization of their products. I think that's something I can elaborate on more regarding that. So it's what is missing, and I feel like as pharma associations, this is something on not just a regional level, even on a continental level, we can implement with the regulators. So trying to bridge the research they have into something that is marketable and also able to reach the consumer in a way that it's actually supposed to be to meet the quality, safety, efficacy requirements necessary. I think those are the few submissions I can.
Thank you very much. I think Professor Caleb, they are trying to challenge you on GMP. Once you've finished everything, you know, the opportunities in GMP, opportunities in fill and finish, you know, right from you. I think what is trying to shout out is that we don't have that linkages between us and you. You do your research, finish, do your clinical trials, do your tests and everything, and then and I think that's what he's trying to raise there. But thank you very much, Dr. Adrian Dungu, for that. John, your pickups from the keynote.
Thank you, Solomon. All protocol observed. allow me to also extend thanks to AFIA for coordinating the mainstream civil society, extend our gratitude to Dr. Daniel Chavainza for always working with the civil society community, and to the Uganda Various Institute for always providing windows of opportunity for CSO engagements. So I would start off by pointing at the inequalities in access to COVID-19 vaccines globally. I think between the low-income countries and the high-income countries exposed the need to start having conversations around advancing local manufacturing capacity in the different countries, but also Africa broadly. So I would say the AMA program partly has advanced these conversations at regional level. And for us as civil society, our concerns have been at mainly community engagements within the conversation. Because partly when you look at the different conversations and platforms that are going on at national level, there is limited or deliberate efforts to engage the community. With the introduction of a number of biomedical interventions, we know that at country level, the efforts to introduce, let's say, the HIV prevention options, like the long-acting injectable PrEP. We also have the vaginal ring that has been recently being introduced at regional level. Then there are also efforts to, of course, roll out the malaria vaccine that you communicated in your keynote address. So the question that we have as civil society is, what are the deliberate efforts to ensure that there is a meaningful engagement of community, the citizens that we are providing for these innovations, in ensuring that they accept the different medical products that we are introducing at country level, and we ensure that we also rebuild the public trust. Because with the COVID-19 pandemic, we realized that there was a lot of mixed communication around mixing and matching. There was also mixed communication in the rollout of the COVID-19 vaccination efforts. So we are wondering what is different this time when it comes to rolling out some of these efforts at country level. Broadly, that is what I can comment about the keynote address for now, as we keep on with the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. We want to recognize the arrival of the Honorable Minister, Monica Msenero. You're very welcome, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you for making time to come amidst your busy schedule. Let me just bring in Dr. Frank Kalebu. Dr. Frank is from the National Drug Authority as a regulator. There are conversations on the Africa Medicines Agency. I think Professor also hinted about it. I don't know if we have ratified. The last I checked is that Rwanda is now hosting the secretariat in Kigali. And there were conversations that we were supposed to host that secretariat. Yeah, but anyway, Rwanda took it, and it's still within the East African community. And yeah, so I'd love to hear from you, from the National Drug Authority as a regulator, and your overall view on the keynote address. You're welcome.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Professor Kalebu. And for me, it's a privilege to meet you at last. You've been a motivation in a way. From the time I joined secondary, they always thought we are related. So, and so that has been a motivation for me to go to where I am. Thank you so much. But also, I want to thank you for the message. It was very well balanced. The key things for me I noted is the fact it's inadmissible that indeed we need to manufacture vaccines locally and in Africa, and NDA recognizes it. And maybe one of the things that we are not aware probably is that most of the multinationals that used to make these vaccines, they are actually also moving away. They are moving into other products. And the reason for that is that in the West, most of these vaccines are not needed anymore. Yet here in Africa, we need them. And that means that we really need to take a mandate. Otherwise, most of these vaccines will end up in a category of being called orphan drugs or orphan vaccines. So indeed, we recognize that because we're observing it. And I must say that NDA has built the capacity to do that in all the directorates, because if you look at our mandate, it's quality, efficacy, and safety. And so you have the GMP, which is handling the quality bit. Then you have the pharmacovigilance teams, you have the clinical trial teams, you have the people who are in charge of post-marketing surveillance. And all that is designed to make sure that the product is followed from the time it's developed to the time it's marketed, and also to follow that there are no dangers which are coming from the product. So we recognize that. But also one of the things we have, the sole buyers of vaccines are governments. You will not find mainly, you will not find the private companies really buying vaccines. And what that means that it is not an attractable area for many of the investors. They have to look at either making negotiations with government, and not just one government, but several governments, so that they can be able to have a bigger market they can be able to meet. But also we noted, for example, that a lot of facilities in, for example, India, that were also making vaccines, COVID vaccines, when we find that finally the epidemic was going down, they became redundant. So now the issue of scalability and repurposefulness of these industries is becoming primary also. You have to notice that manufacturing vaccines is complex. Some of the GMP requirements are really stringent. I'll give an example. If you want to manufacture rabies vaccine, that has to be a standalone plant. You will never make any other vaccine. If you want to make polio vaccine, it has to be a standalone plant. You will never make any other vaccine in that. And those are the international requirements for manufacturing vaccines. So because of that, imagine you are making one product whereby someone who is dealing in other pharmaceuticals, they can make over 150. And then again, that kind of facility, in terms of requirement, doesn't come less close to what maybe whoever is making pharmaceuticals can. So the investment is really a lot, and it is a multi-sector collaboration that is required. The government and all the other sectors have to come in if we are to have something that is sustainable. Yeah, and the other thing, of course, which came out is the issue of GMP costs, even locally. I must say that as at National Drug Authority, we are seeing an increase in people who are coming to put up facilities, and they also are trying to make sure that they engage government to buy in, but not only the Ugandan government, but also other governments. And one of the reasons which may be not taken notice of is the fact that in East Africa, NDA is actually regarded as, it's actually given the mandate of GMP, so they know that the GMP in Uganda is at a given level. I know we have had issues of being certified as ML3, but those ones are typically due to our regulation, which is under review, to make sure that we meet, because most of the requirements that WHO raised are to do with that. But also in Africa, NDA is actually recognized. So because of that, a lot of manufacturers know that if I meet the standards of NDA, then there are chances I will meet for the WHO and so forth. So we have had also several other facilities that have come in. I think right now we have close to 23 pharmaceutical facilities. And then in the surgical instrument sector, they are rising to around 19. And we have 10 facilities which are coming up, which are actually under constructions. Several of those are injectables, which are coming up, but also we have one which is going to deal with biologicals and the vaccines, which they already mentioned, the day facility. We've been there, from this time they started, we've seen the progress, we know the challenges they are bound to face, but we are in discussion so that this whole process is eased up. The beauty with a facility like that is that they are embracing the new technologies which allow repurposefulness, so that you do not have to manufacture one vaccine in one block, but you can manufacture even these, the vaccines that would require specific requirements in the same area. So that will give us, it will give us a big advantage to that, yeah. Of course, the other thing which we noted is the collaboration of all players, as I've mentioned, and also the fact that this collaboration, we normally do collaborate with Uganda Investment Authority, with URA. Someone may wonder why URA, or even Ministry of Trade. Many of the times, manufacturers here, the reason they find GMP expensive is because, first of all, the equipments are imported. The air handling units, for example, which are supposed to filter air to a specified grade that is required, or pharmaceutical grade, are highly expensive. We do not have anyone who makes them. And then you have to import also whoever will set it up. Now, after setting up this qualification, we do not have people who are qualified to do that. So again, you get those people from out. Then there is the periodic maintenance, which goes over the years. It means we have to get these people. And doesn't just stop there. Even testing equipment, you buy an HPLC, it means if you want to do routine calibration, it means you are going to have to go to the supplier, Agilent or Shumanzi and so forth. So because we do not have, we are lacking in those areas, the multi-sector play is that we are trying to encourage even other sectors to build capacity of people in engineering to help out. And we have seen this being done. For example, in CIPLA, the engineers before were from India, but they took on a mandate to train, and they have started doing most of the things. So it's the same thing we are trying to encourage. We also want, for example, URA, we have engaged them on so many occasions that some of these things, they recognize that they are for manufacture, and then they may give waivers in terms of taxes, because that is one of the things that manufacturers complain about, or they find very high. Other things like raw materials, yes, the taxes are not there. We do not charge also anything. But the biggest challenge with raw materials is that they are also being sourced. So you source them from India, you bring them here, there's a cost already attached. And then you have an Indian bringing also paracetamol, you have manufactured paracetamol here, you will never beat his cost. You will still find that your cost is what? Very high. So we do not have so much of facilities that are making this API, all the raw materials, which is kind of impacting. But also, part of the reason, like what Dr. Cyril Morris said in the beginning, that we are recognizing that if we have products being manufactured here, then we put a certain tariff that prevents the importation of some of these products from out, so that we can be able to promote the ones which are coming on our market here. Then, of course, Professor Caleb also talked about the GMP needs after research. One of the things we've noticed that is hampering even manufacturers or other researchers is that we tend to do a bit of this disjoint without let me say NDA. The reason I'm saying that is sometimes the GMP requirements have to be inbuilt from the time of research. So we are trying to encourage a lot of manufacturers that before even you put a stone, come we meet, let's look at the scope. You may have a limited scope. We help you to see the requirements in a broader way, so that you do not reach a stage and you are stuck because the facility you have put up, the products you are going to manufacture cannot be manufactured. So sometimes, because some of these products, especially vaccines, require specialized technologies, it means that we need to be in touch with Uganda Virus Institute Research Center, so that when they are developing a given vaccine, we at the same time we are discussing which kind of technologies are required, so that when it comes to GMP, the product already is built with GMP requirements in what fully incorporated here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, I think my. All right. Thanks a lot. While you're speaking, you mentioned that if you're to do manufacturing, like for rabies vaccine, it's one single line. Wow. So how do you justify an investment? I just looked around, and as I was told, the minimum investment capital for any vaccine manufacturing is about what? $50-60 million. It's crazy. So telling someone to set up a plant, invest $60 million into the economy to produce one line of vaccines, and is not guaranteed of a market. That's very interesting. Gavi just released a report on their website, and I encourage you to read it. And it's up for download. I was just looking at the numbers. They said that Africa's current market is about $1 billion in terms of the money we spend on vaccines annually. And it's projecting that this could grow to about $2.8 billion by 2040. Staggering, that amount. And they have highlighted that there have been over 30 vaccine manufacturing proposals or projects that have come up. Sadly, some of these have fallen off, perhaps because of the market. And the report also looks at what can we do to keep these 30 projects alive. And Gavi is alive to the fact that they need to provide some market assurance. One of the things that was highlighted by you, Professor, is that investors need that assurance that we will procure from you. I think also I think it's the guy from BioVac who mentioned it. So I would love now to just do another round of questions, and then I open it up to the floor. Dr. Adrian Dungu, from what Dr. Caleb was saying, it's quite very difficult, because vaccines by their very nature is heavy investment. And some people have argued that you cannot absolutely compare them to usual, lines of production like medicines and syrups and creams. It's a complicated thing. What will it take you people in the private sector to decide and say, okay, can we come together and make sure that we work with external, maybe investors, work out a collaboration, or design a business modeling that can make sure that you can set up a plant? Of course, I know that there are countries that have taken this up: Senegal, Egypt, South Africa, I think Morocco. I don't know. Yeah, Morocco. They've now really set up this. But in Uganda, for example, what would it take for us to have that manufacturing line? And what support do you need as manufacturers? Maybe we can start there.
First and foremost, I would like to say that almost anywhere in the global south, it's been impossible for a single private entity to just come up with an initiative of vaccine manufacturing. Ideally, what drives business in pharmaceutical sector starts with policy. I can give you an example of India. We have been talking about their reduction in utilization of the capacities of vaccine production. However, they've built capacity to to be able to supply 60% of the world's vaccines needed. And I've been reading their agenda for the next 10 years. They want to grow their pharma industry from 120 billion to between 120 to 130 billion dollars, which is current right now at 50 billion dollars. So when you look at these programs, to attain them starts with policy. So it means when we have a policy tailored to development of these vaccine technologies, the private sector can collaborate with government, and then funding can be mobilized. So it's expensive, but once that initiative is created, we can kickstart from that. So what I can say that as government of Uganda has managed to do is the investment in research, which is the prime factor you have to start with. At the moment, we are spending less than 0.5% in R&D as Uganda. But under normal circumstances, a country has to spend about 2% of its GDP in R&D. So when we look at us as a country as Uganda, we need to decide that if we want to take this initiative of making vaccines, what vaccines are we needing as a country? Because these are not going to be needed by Western markets. So we can come up with that framework paper and then see with the private sector, what is it able to provide in terms of technologies? And one of the things we've battled with, at least I've talked to the team that is helping the Senegal, that company you're talking about that is developing vaccines in Senegal. So they are grappling with human resource development. So at UVRI, they are lucky they are training people, but down there in other countries, they are grappling with that problem. And two, when you train workers, what is the sustainability of the continuation program? So that has not been looked at in many of the African plants that are developing vaccines. It's the same issue in Rwanda. In Senegal, they are facing the same. But at least in North Africa, they've narrowed down that, because I myself underwent some training when I was in North Africa in the making of vaccines in rats and all that, those processes they undergo through. So what I can say is when we have a good policy framework, we can sit with manufacturers and see how to grow the ecosystem. Because also, regarding the vaccines, you need one raw material from this place, another from another country. So a person will look at the cost of sourcing these raw materials as expensive and instead decide to set up a plant where they are in close proximity. So that is something we can narrow down as a group. It's why I focalized on saying that if you sit down with one company, it may not develop entirely what you need in the vaccine chain, because it will be centered on what it can do or what it can prioritize as a company. But as an association, when we sit, you can see services another company can provide, services you can outsource from another country before we even get to the markets, because the market guarantees can be sorted on national levels regarding harmonization of markets, but the development and the sustainability of that development in the vaccine manufacturing program is the hardest part.
Okay, yeah. Thanks. Thank you very much. I think buttressing that with Dr. Kalebu's submission of policy, and you said that you started with policy. Dr. Kalebu said policy. There must be an enabling policy environment to support the investment if anyone is sinking a dollar. And we have Dr. Ayume here, Dr. Charles Ayume. I want to pass the mic to you briefly, and if someone can help me. Karim, just help me take the mic to Dr. Ayume briefly. Creating a safe environment for investors. There's been an argument that there must be a deliberate effort by the state or government to invest in vaccine manufacturing. I think where things have worked very well in the big pharma, and Dr. Chabainze can help here, when you look at the big pharmas, the countries there have a say in the way things are done. Either they have given some guarantees or they can support its heavy investment, and therefore governments. That's why we saw during the COVID-19 pandemic, governments were willing to invest even much more beyond just, the Johnson and Johnson and all these big pharmas. Governments deliberately decide to work side by side with the private sector in the vaccine industry. Everyone is talking about policy. Would love to hear from you as a policy maker on what can be done to support this initiative.
Thank you very much. Honorable Minister and ladies and gentlemen, my name is Charles Ayume. I chair the Parliamentary Committee on Health. I will give you what I want to hear, and off camera, I will tell you my personal experience. Being to be a worker, there are things for home. But I think the role of Parliament is clear, and it's actually constitutional. It is appropriate. That's the budget. There is legislation. There is representing our people. And then there is oversight. Now, I'll speak to the issue of legislation. For us to be able to move forward, there has to be enabling laws. And I think you're aware that 2 years ago, we amended the Public Health Amendment Act, and we collapsed the existing Immunization Act of, I think, 2018. Whether there were components, whether immunization should be mandatory or it should be optional and so forth. But Parliament took a stand and said the traditional vaccines will be mandatory. The novel vaccines, the ones that are still undergoing research and in development, would be optional, but the onus would be upon government to avail the necessary information to the public for them to make informed choices. But if you, on that pulpit, decampaign a government position, then the law applies to you. Let's say an imam and so forth. So the issue of laws, that's a preserve of Parliament. Now, when it comes to financing, and I think everybody has alluded to it, that R&D and funding these projects are quite costly. So sometimes government will come in as to provide guarantors, to provide loans. I think somebody said the project in Matuga is an ambitious one, and I think government has tried to come in now. The minister had to come to Parliament to see if government could extend some support to the private developer who had gone for commercial loans. Now, that's how government can come in to bail some, because these are very expensive projects. But the most important thing that many people forget is the issue of market. Vaccines, the biggest client is governments. Very few people from the private sector will go and buy your vaccines. So it's government. So we have to provide. And off-takers agreements will come from the minister responsible for health, minister responsible for finance. So those are some of the ways in which government can come in. But also negotiating at regional level. The market of Uganda is so small for some of these vaccines that you're going to manufacture. My interface with one of the top companies, they said 45 million people. If you took 20% of 45 million, that's for the under fives, they would make that in 1 month. That means for the 11 months, your production lines would be static, redundant. Then you wait to the next year. So you would have to look at it as a ESC block, SADC, and so forth. And that can only be done at the political level, president to president. What we call political economics, geopolitics, and so forth. If a neighboring country manufactures A, you say me, I'll manufacture B, and then we trade. Don't go and try and manufacture all the 13 vaccines and you think the continent will buy from you. Pick out 2, 3, and let SADC do 1, 2, A, B, C, and so forth, and then buy from them, they buy from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ayume. Dr. Ayume chairs the Parliamentary Committee on Health, sharing his insights. My time is really fast spent, so can we love on the panel? Let's clap for them. Thank you very much for your views. I wish I had more time, but looks like we have about 10 minutes to close this. Without any further ado, I would love now to invite the Honorable Minister for Science, Technology and Innovation, the Honorable Dr. Monica Musenero, to come and officially launch the dissemination and also give her remarks as our chief guest. Honorable Dr. Musenero, you're very welcome. Karibu sana. Come and speak to us. Can we clap for the for Dr. Musenero here? Do you have a presentation, ma'am? The technical team can come and help. You have a presentation? Please come and help here with, I think we'll project it. You're very welcome, Dr. Musenero. You can use any, but this is more preferred, ma'am.
I have a presentation, but please don't give it to them because for some reason the presentation has had a lot of technical glitches. Two computers have rejected to save the presentation that I prepared for here. So maybe they can show there. They can just, for the past 3 hours I've been trying to save my presentation and it has refused. So just want to talk about I'll show the one. The vaccine one. Let's save it. Okay. So you will show here. Then you will show the all right, honorable members of parliament present, and all of you, since I wasn't here, I'm not updated with the protocol, but allow me stand on the protocol established. I'm sorry to come late, but I tried to make sure that I am here. By the time we were beginning, I was in Liantonde, so I had to fight to be here. So that is no excuse. Apologies for being late. And even when my presentation has not, there were a few things that I really wanted to share. I have to say that I'm very glad that we are having these discussions, because before COVID, we couldn't even think about it. Everybody lived happily. We have vaccines. They come in, we buy them like this. The ordinary human being didn't really care, so long as the children were vaccinated against the known killer diseases. And for your travel, you had your yellow fever. Many of us hardly knew where that yellow fever vaccine comes from. We did not know where we were. We did not know what was at stake. But thanks to COVID, we all woke up and started to raise certain things. I saw questions that many on the continent had never asked. We were now asking those questions. Why aren't we making vaccines? Why aren't we making drugs? Why aren't we doing certain things? So this is, for me, a very healthy conversation. I have to say I followed partly the keynote presentation of Professor Ponciano, and I also partly followed, I missed just a small bit of the panel discussion. I was following online as I was coming. And thank you so much for the keynote presentation. And thank you for all of you for the thoughts and ideas that we are raising, because it is out of us, out of our brainstorming, and out of what we come up and the actions that we take, which will define the future. So can you put the vaccine value chain? I spent a bit of time of my life studying at Cornell University, and I was privileged to study vaccines and vaccine manufacturing. I was doing a master's in microbiology with a minor in immunology and virology. And so my project was in vaccine design and production. That was my thesis. And so that gave me a bit of background and confidence. And I must say that when I was coming back from the US, coming back to Uganda, my ambition, my first ambition was to start vaccine manufacturing in the country. Because I studied the technologies, it was nothing very really out of the world. We could afford at least the animal vaccines because the human vaccines have higher levels. When I came back to the country, I remember discussing with one person, and after listening to me, they sympathetically looked at me and said, "Make sure you get back your job of teaching at Makerere, because those idealistic thoughts of yours are not going to work." I said, "But why?" Said, "You will hardly get a breakthrough here." I said, "But I can teach people these things. And I'd even investigated some of the machines, and it was not very, very expensive for us to start somewhere." But as I kept on working, eventually, the outcome was that I realized he was right, not because technically we are incapable, but mindset-wise, we were incapable. It was not lack of knowledge, it was not lack of skill, it is not even lack of funding. The first barrier that we have is mindset. I can tell you that most of us, it is just now that we have begun to think, this thing costs this much, this thing, but we will all stand here and tell you how vaccine manufacturing is very expensive. But we just didn't pay attention. So, yes, it is expensive. I can't say it's not. But the first barrier that we must overcome as Ugandans, as Africans, is mindset. Because if we think something is impossible, it's going to be impossible. Now, in 2021, when I remember the day very well, because the repercussions from that day have sometimes threatened my life. When the president called me after addressing the nation, the first address, he called me and said, "Mr. Nerogani, find scientists, and we start working on vaccines, diagnostics, and medicines for treating COVID." I was like, "Your Excellency, where do I begin? How do I begin? Where do I?" Remembering the other one. But when you've been given a directive, actually it was a 1-minute meeting. Go and do this, dismissed. So do I go back and tell him we cannot do it? No. So I left that place and started to find out more. I gathered the people that I thought knew, including Professor Ponciano. What can we do? We had a few Zoom meetings. Eventually, we rolled into meetings. And eventually, I discovered that if we start, we will make progress. But if we don't start, we will always fear because we don't know. And there is no way we are going to know until we start. So fast forward, we were able to procure equipment that we had initially thought was impossible, was unaffordable for us. We procured the equipment. We were able to fund research. And by the end of the first year, we had the first molecules. The first year, we had the first molecules that candidate vaccines. I was like, so this is possible. But also, although this thing went on, it actually, the thought of Africa manufacturing vaccines started here in Uganda with our president. Then he mobilized his fellow presidents, and then it was picked up by Africa CDC and other people. It started here. So I remember the first meetings, Professor Ponciano, I think you didn't come, but you sent me your scientists. And we sat with Professor Nantulia, who had manufactured for us, who had produced for us Cookstar, the only vaccine known to be produced in Uganda. Cookstar. That's the Professor Nantulia now. Come, you are the only one-eyed in this country of blind people. I know the technologies, I know the science, but the issues of getting to vaccine manufacturing in the country, or vaccine research for that case, how do we move? But we were able to start. And as we started, we decided to, whatever we understand we do, and work ahead. And so by the end of that first year, we were members of the Pan-Africa Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative. Is it Alliance? Something, PAVMA. We were members. We attended some meetings in Addis Ababa, although eventually somewhere we seemed to lose the connection because mainly our ideology. The main issue was our ideology. Our ideology was, even if we do not get to produce a vaccine we can inject people with, we want to have capacity end to end. Now, the ecosystem of vaccine manufacturing was not accepting of that. That Africans, we can understand R&D from the beginning, we can build capacity, we can run clinical trials of vaccines, we can actually reach the manufacturing end. That ideology was not accepted. I remember going to one meeting and I presented our progress, saying we have some candidate vaccines and now we are working, we want to get IP. And there was an automatic in the audience. And this gentleman followed us up after the opening ceremony, followed us up and said, "Did I hear that you are working to get IP?" I said, "Yes." He said, "But why? Why?" I said, "Why not?" Said, so our ideology was, yes, some people will build capacity for fill and finish, but if this is going to be a long term, we may not produce a vaccine to address the current epidemic. But must we sit around and wait the next epidemic to find us exactly where this one found us? Should we just sit around? No, we are going to build the capacity. And so we are continuing with the capacity building. And here they have managed to show how we have summarized the steps, and I will comment on where we are. Professor Ponciano gave some idea about some of these. I will enrich to bring you to where we are. So the first issue is ideation. Can we actually come up with concepts which look at a disease, a pathogen, and we identify the potential molecules or the potential approach? We are really very learned, and we can do that. And ladies and gentlemen, we have proved that we can do ideation and come up with candidate vaccines. Currently, we started with 4 ideas, but we have pushed forward the 3. The one which we dropped was the one of self-replicating messenger RNA. We thought that before we jump on the new technologies, let us first master the old technologies. We went into R&D, the research and development, and we have pushed all these 3. They have reached in animal studies, all the 3 vaccines. 2 are made, researched at UVRI, and 1 at the College of Veterinary Medicine. These are the human vaccines. You remember the mice, the rats? Yes. Those were the rats. If you want to know if I was annoyed or what, no. For me, it showed me where we are. And I will show you a few slides of why I didn't really. It was very informative for me that Ugandans thought that research can be done using rats which run around in their houses. It was extremely informative to know where am I beginning and where are we working. So all these vaccines have reached, and there are 3 steps in animal studies. 1 is to gauge how animals, whether they respond a bit, and then decide the dosage and what we have been able. All of them have completed that. Second is to see if I vaccinate, do they mount a good immune system? All the, I am sure 1 has finished. I'm not sure the 2 have finished, but 1 has finished, and it showed a very, very good response. We were using different technologies, but those technologies which already we have existing vaccines using those technologies. And then the final one is this vaccine effective? And so that you have to vaccinate the special mice, the ones that I bought at 8 million each, because those were the cheapest. Others were selling at $100,000. And for us even to get, it took us a year of waiting in line. The first person where we paid, they couldn't give us. They said, no, it will take us over 2 years. So after 6 months, they returned our money. Then we started to look for another one, and that one gave us. But now we have multiplied those mice, because they were expensive, because we were buying a license to multiply. If you pay for only 1, then you use only that one because they are patented. but we had to pay for a license so we can multiply them indefinitely in Uganda. And so we have now, how many, Brenda? We have about 160, and we use some for the research. They are very, very special mice because they have some genes from a human being in them. So then we have some products which have come, which Professor Ponciano talked about intellectual property patents. For the first time, we have some patents along the vaccine value chain. You start working on a vaccine, but along the way you produce a lot of byproducts. So we have some patents. And now we are constructing, that green there, we are constructing the pilot plant. We are building an industrial park for this, and one of the facilities there, a pilot plant is a smaller manufacturing facility which enables you to produce small volumes before, to prove, for proof of concept, before you can go into large scale manufacturing. We are hoping that we will be able, once you have proof of concept, all those investors will come. The investors will come. But when you don't have proof of concept, nobody will come. So once we finish these challenge studies and the pilot plant will enter the clinical trials, we are hoping we will do that this coming financial year. We will go through, we are working with NDA every step of the way, parenting instead of us finishing and then they come. Bulk production, the decision will be made if the facility at Day Biopharma can do bulk production, then we'll just channel our domestic vaccines. But what I want to say is that we have constructed a road for vaccine R&D in the country. Now we know we have trained a lot of people as a result of that. There is a lot of knowledge now in the country. We cannot be found at the same level where we were. And because of that, we have now initiated work on the diseases that bedevil us. Because now we have the facilities, we have the equipment for research. And I want to tell you that when we started, even finding some of this equipment, convincing people to sell us was not easy. So, because some people said, we don't sell to that market. Because nobody has ever dreamt that Africa will on our own initiate an idea to develop a vaccine and patent it. All the discussions in the Pan-Africa Medical Vaccine Manufacturing Alliance is about fill and finish, unless they have changed now. The concept that Professor Ponciano talked about, Johnson & Johnson production in South Africa, is a fill and finish. The concept in Rwanda is a fill and finish. So fill and finish is they produce the vaccine, they do the research, somebody does the research and produces the vaccine and all the different components, and then you bring that bulk and the different ingredients in the country and you mix. Our ideology is we want to do end to end. That's the ideology that we have. And we have made good progress. Now for animal vaccines, because you build a capacity in both ways, the principles are the same. So for animal vaccines, we have a pilot plant complete with a fill and finish. Complete. It's ready. If actually, because we haven't used it yet for anything, should a disease come now, it will be easy to discuss with a partner to come and we do fill and finish, because for most of them, the fill and finish is the same. So we have in the country, it is in Namamve, a complete vaccine fill and finish unit. Actually, that unit is complete. It's end to end. It begins from the ideation has been done in Makerere, and We have the pilot production, and we are going into clinical trials for the animals. But after that, that facility will be able to manufacture for us the beginning vaccines. Hopefully soon. What has delayed us? Funding. The funding is up and down. And the reason is that most people don't appreciate. First, people don't think that you can, we can do this. We have not taken time to understand enough. We have believed what we have been told. But ladies and gentlemen, our checking has shown that we have not exactly been told the accurate information. And when we check, we can do. Professor Ponciano talked a little bit about manufacturing of therapeutics. In the country, we have chosen to prioritize natural therapeutics as our first line. That is what we have chosen. Because if we start with the purified molecules, the synthesized molecules, we don't have any competitive advantage, especially when we are beginning. But the whole world has realized that single molecules treating blood pressure, it doesn't work. That is why if you have hypertension here, you have either 3, 4, 5 medicines. One to treat the systolic, one to treat the diastolic, then one to counter the effects of those, then one to counter the effects of this one. And but yet we know that in a natural form, these drugs could do, these other components could moderate. And we have made extremely good progress. We have established a very unique clinical trial system. And we are hoping, we are running our second and third through. Very, very fantastic system. We will soon finish the 2 that are going on. We will tell you what comes out. And we have 26. Now that we have refined, put up that fantastic system of in vitro, and we are able to do it cheaper than we had been told. Much, much cheaper. Why? Because we have innovated a system. Instead of starting off anew, I go to UVRI. UVRI, what capacity do you have? We just buy the few things that UVRI doesn't have. But UVRI doesn't need to put up the whole system. We go to Makerere. Makerere, what do you have? We have an animal house. What is missing? Now we build those central facilities such that the vaccine R&D takes place at UVRI. UVRI hands over to Makerere to do vet school, to do the animal studies. After that, we hand over to the clinical trial people. We are able to do it much cheaper. So further steps we have passed, we have been able to do it much cheaper. We have been able to do it much cheaper. So we need to question some of the things. Yes, indeed, there is a challenge. There is going to be a challenge with entering the market. Yes, indeed, there is going to be a challenge with investment, because it has taken us a little bit longer, because the funding comes slow. But when we focus, we can do it. I don't think that Africa and Uganda should relegate themselves to waiting for others to working on us. One of the panelists said, these people are giving up. They don't need the vaccines. Of course, they will need them. Because if they stop vaccinating, those diseases are going to come back. They'll get them from here. And then we shall have the market. So let's be strategic. Let's negotiate. When you have something, you can negotiate. Now I find people more receptive to negotiate with us when we tell them, by the way, we have already done this. And they're like, they come here, they're like, you've done all this? Yeah, we have. Now let us work together. So, coming back to the topic, can we manufacture vaccines? Affirmative, yes. I tell you, yes, we can. The silence is too loud. Yes, we can. And what we have decided at Science, Technology and Innovation, and generally with the support of the Cabinet and Parliament, is we are going to identify the challenges, not to induce fear, but so that we can innovatively address them. When we started doing this work in 2021, you could hardly find 100 people to work through the entire pathogen economy. Right now we have over 2,000 skilled individuals who can work on, of course those are few, given the vastness of the skills that we need. We are going to continue to build. So one of the challenges is actually lack of skilled human beings along the value chain. Now, we have skilled human beings. Could you put for me my slide of the journey? In the second presentation, not this one, the one which refused to save. So, we have the scientists, Ponciano Kalebu's staff, we have them. But we discovered that they did not know, they knew how to work in the lab and work a bit in collaboration with the other labs and produce a candidate vaccine maybe produced by a partner. But how do you turn that into a manufacturing facility which produces vaccine? Those skills we don't have. They were not there. Why don't we have them? They are not part of our education system. They are not components in our education system. We know molecular biology now, we can clone, we can express, we can do the immunology, but how do you turn that into a vaccine on the market? We don't have those skills. We are building them because we know exactly what we need. And it won't cost a fortune for us to build them. It takes just a very short time. So we have had innovative ways, including, for example, having some of my staff work from out. They work, they go attach themselves, and they keep building capacity down here. Now this is what we do. And we have made a lot of progress. So the challenges, we shall address them. We never move forward without ambition. We need ambition. Ladies and gentlemen, we need to be ambitious, or else we are going to continuously remain behind. How did these countries who were recently didn't have vaccines, how did they make them? From the anatomy, I know they all have gray material of the brain, and it's like ours. We can do it. So let's have some faith, let's have ambition, and let us be able to tackle the challenges we have so far identified and mapped out are not unsurmountable. It's a matter of skill. In some, we have actually enrolled and appointed some of Ugandans who are outside. They mentor our people here. And we are very, very close to having the first Ugandan vaccine in humans produced here. We are very, very close. Because one of our vaccines is really, really very close. And it's very, very promising. The results so far we have are good. For me, I just want to break that barrier. The majority of the things that we face, for example, when they tell you, your vaccine will never be licensed. Let's get one and they refuse to license it. Then we will know how to tackle that challenge. For me, the only challenge I have is NDA to get that level of accreditation. Once the NDA gets that level of accreditation, we are working very closely with WHO. Every step we take, we go, please check, are we doing it right? If being logged out is about global marketing, by the way, I learned in one meeting that African medical agency will not be able to accredit vaccines for the market. That was geopolitics. People manipulated, and everybody, we asked questions and everybody were like, hey, how did that happen? This is what the presidents wanted. It has not been given that mandate. So you still have to go through the normal system. But we have China's vaccine was not accredited. But it is the vaccine which made Dubai open their airport. So let us work. Let the scientists work with diligence. Let Parliament support us and give us the funding we need on time. Once we are able to produce a vaccine like this, we will have a lot of investors. Even now, very many investors are interested now in coming, because when we show them what so far we've done, then they see the human capital that we have. We will build the partnerships. The traditional investor is not going to invest in vaccines. The other approach that we started very early is collaborative work with our neighbors. Somebody mentioned it here. We want to, build the confidence that we can do the whole chain, but we don't intend to be the only ones. Would like Tanzania to participate, produce some inputs. Would like Rwanda to produce something, such that we are interdependent. And when this vaccine comes out, it is our vaccine. And so, for me, maybe I'm too courageous. Maybe I'm too courageous, but we need the courage, we need the ambition, we need the focus, we need to be very systematic, and we have built a very systematic way of approaching things, and I believe that vaccine manufacturing is going to be very possible. There is a difference between a company manufacturing vaccines and a state manufacturing vaccines. A company is looking at profit. A state is looking at security. We are looking at health security. So some things may not be profitable to a company, but as a state, first of all, how much money do we spend on vaccines annually? But even you put money aside, when now the population of the world has increased, so any disease, and with the technology and the movement, any disease breaking out anywhere in the world will reach us in less than a week. Are we going to sit around again? And there are people who are daring pathogens. There are people whose work is to dare viruses to see if they can give them gain of function. They dare the viruses. They are modifying them. There are people whose ambition is to use these pathogens for warfare. Are we going to sit around and wait to depend on other people? No. That is neither prudent nor wise. We cannot do that. Let us produce the vaccines, let us build a capacity, and let us develop a capacity to produce the vaccine, even if government is investing in money. After all, they're investing in money. Now, I want to share with you an example of something where we have made better progress. Diagnostics. It was the same. You can't make diagnostics. You see, the diagnostics are going to be, they are not going to pass. These molecular diagnostics, we did it. Most of the COVID tests you take now, we produce the kits locally. Moreover, once we showed that we could do it, I think Global Fund gave us money to produce standards for East and Southern Africa. And we were able to do it. Those panels, the proficiency panels, we supplied over 20 countries molecular diagnostics, which we thought Africans cannot do. In fact, when we value the work that we have so far done, it's more than the money that government has invested. Yet we have not invested much in that particular project. So what we need, one, we need courage. Two, we need knowledge. Let's get out of a black box. I had told those people to show my slides, but they are not showing them. They have refused. Okay. This was what I was, how do you move from the idea to the market? How do you move from idea to market? That knowledge is not part of our education system. Even pharmacists, they study how to prescribe the medicine, how to package it, how to store it, how to sell it, how to read the expiry date, not how to move an idea for a drug from idea to a product on the shelf. You'll find more products made by our indigenous scientists. We call them indigenous scientists. You find more products notified by NDA and on the shelves than from our scientific community, because that knowledge is omitted. And in fact, we are given the opposite, and it becomes a big barrier. Oh, your drug will never be approved. You see, clinical trials are too expensive. You see, so you get a barrier around you. You don't have faith, you don't have courage, so you don't try. When you don't try, of course, nothing will change. Nothing will change. So we don't know the product development. It's not part of our education system. Market analysis. The people who do market analysis don't know how innovations work and drugs work. So there is no intersection. And moving these products and all that knowledge, now that we know, now we are packaging it and training. So we are building workforce who understand industrial drug development. So this is just a matter of time. And there is a lot in there. Show me the black box. That will be the last slide that I share here. Lydia guide. It's up above. You can see, I know my slides have been presenting them. I say I'm evangelizing Uganda to make science work so that we can develop our economy. Let's get out of that fear. We can make it. We can do it. Are you able to get it? Okay. So why are we like this? Why are we afraid? We are afraid because we are unaware. We have no idea what to do in a certain area. So what somebody tells you, that's what you take. That's what you take. There is nobody who has ever been allowed in any industry freely. It's by force. America is trying to shut down TikTok. Do you really think TikTok is more dangerous than Facebook? Huh? Please answer. Do you think TikTok? No, it is not. It is not. It's protection of your market. This thing comes and takes over your market. So we also need to understand. So the reason why, the major reason why we have not been able to think about making vaccines is not because we are poor. It's not because we don't have machines. It's not because we are unable to. It's because we don't know. If we can deal with the ignorance that we have, yes, this is what we have called the black box. Now, I didn't want the other slides above, but the concept is like this. Science comes from ideas. Every scientific product you have started from an idea. Now, ideas build on the knowledge you have. And the biggest place where we build people's knowledge is school, the formal education system. So if I manipulate your education system, I can dictate which ideas you can conceive. So for us, we have mapped the health sector and mapped the knowledge in the education system. And in all these sectors, we divided it in three. There's production of raw materials, value addition, and the middle one, this one is not labeled, but it's okay. The middle one is value addition and consumption. Our entire education system related to health concentrates on one, creating awareness about disease. By P4, you know about the germs and what. Secondary school, you will learn about it. You go to O level, you are more aware of disease. You go to A level, you are even more aware of the pathogens. You go to medical school or in a medical related course, you become a perfect doctor. I've had 5 laparotomies and I'm still alive. Excellent doctors. And that end is extremely good. But none of my doctors is able to produce an anesthetic, which they use. They cannot produce the scalpel. And not even the contemporary. They are contemporary. They cannot produce the cannula. They cannot produce the suture material because it was never part of the education system. They could be producing them if they had been trained about that as much as they were trained about opening me up and putting me back and I'm alive. So that knowledge has been denied to us. That's why we are so afraid. So our education about health focuses on enabling consumption of imported materials. And this was by design, by the way. I'm not afraid to say. So the more I train a person, we teach you. So when you go to the nurses, they will give you China medicine. When you go to the consultant, they ask you, do you want England or Switzerland of the same medicine? Not, do you want Uganda, the one that I have contributed to? So we don't think that way. So the education system has given us what we call a black box. And because of that black box, we simply consume whatever information we are given. We don't look deep into it. Is this true? Is this really true? Could there be another way? Can we innovate around it? So for me, what I want to tell you, black or darkness is not a concept. Darkness is simply absence of light. If we switched off these lights, this room becomes very dark. But just a torch from your phone will illuminate. The moment we provide knowledge and awareness and skill, Africa is the next place to manufacture vaccines. So let's overcome this black box. It simply needs knowledge. We have proved it here in Uganda. We are establishing a pathogen economy very, very fast. Very, 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 very fast. Because of understanding that it is because we lack this. Children fear darkness. Everybody fears darkness. But once you put light, you see where you're going. You are able to move. Are we able to make vaccines as Africa? Yes. Are we able to make vaccines as Uganda? Yes, yes, yes. Is it going to be easy? No. If you're a coward, don't come here. Is it going to be quick? Maybe, maybe not. But definitely it is possible. And I say this as the minister in charge, I'm making promises. I'm making what? Promises. And I'm not speaking on my own behalf, I'm speaking on behalf of government. Yes. And come the next 5 to 10 years, pathogen economy is going to be one of the key sectors in this country. Watch the space. Thank you very much for inviting me. I speak with knowledge and confidence because I know what is still behind here. When time comes, we will show you. Thank you.
The pathogen economy. That's what we live with today. Pathogen economy. Dr. Mulumba, are you ready? Dr. Musenera said, if you're a coward, do not come here. Let's put our hands and love on her. Thank you very much, Mom, for creating time, but also for teaching us that a black box is not an innovation. It's absence of light. I go away with that as well. Thank you very much. We're now going to be officially launching the dissemination process of these different reports. And I would want to invite my brother and colleague, Mr. Karim, Abdul Karim, to come and show us how this is going to be done. After which we'll have a few photo moments. And then we'll have a glass of wine set up outside. Mr. Abdul Karim, you're very welcome. Karibu sana.
Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause to Solomon for leading us well. He always does it the best. As we close up for today, we want to honorably thank you very much for accepting this invitation, but also for being part of these research processes. Our dear Honorable Minister Musenero, we can't take your time for granted, and also our dear officials from government, the high table, we are greatly honored by your presence here. It's been a learning space. It's been a space where we are sharing knowledge, but also we can't take these partnerships and collaborations for granted. We hope that we'll keep these connections. We hope that we'll keep working together, the civil society, the government, the media here, and all the relevant partners in the sector. At this point in time, we want to officially disseminate these products. In case you've not had some of the physical copies, we have some of them there, but also we are sure that you accessed a link to all our products on our Haki website. So I want to take the honor to invite a few persons to join us here to officially launch these products. We'll first have a photo with our dear government officials led by the Honorable Minister, and then we have a group photo as the last one. So I want to invite Dr. Mulumba Moses, the Director General Afya and Haki, who is going to be joined by our Honorable Minister, Dr. Musenero, who is going to lead us in the launch of these products. Professor Potiano, you're welcome to the platform. Dr. Chabainze, we request you to join us. Dr. Maurice Seru, Dr. Ayume, the Chair, Parliamentary Health Committee, and all the AMA partners. We've been implementing this program in partnership with Siatini. Penna, please join us here. HEPS Uganda is here, Joan. AIJ Solomon, please join us. And also Meta Dumake, Dennis, please join us as we launch these products that we've been working together on. So mainly it is having this photo moment, and then Sehad, you're here, Anne, please join us.
do we need markers? Please. Do you have any markers? Okay. Okay. Karim, you can come beside. We seem to be missing many of you in the picture. So, thank you very much. Please. Let me just come, yeah?
They should give you red. They're taking a picture.
Hey. Oh, you have a black one. Okay, so have you taken a good picture? Okay. Thank you very much.
Officially launched. We officially launched this.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So we want to thank you very much for this evening. We still have some more refreshments just at the back there. And also outside, there are more refreshments for us to end this evening in style. We want to thank again the minister and the delegation from the ministries. And we look forward to hosting you again in the future engagements. So we invite you to the refreshments behind there, but also outside. We have more refreshments for the evening. Thank you again. We wish you a great evening.